Start again. Good morning. It's
Good
Rachel
morning.
Bernstein, and you are.
I'm Alex Bay.
So, if you don't mind, we'll start at the beginning. Tell me when you were born and where, and what you know about what your folks were doing around that era.
I was born in 1938, and my parents were both immigrants from Greece. My father came over about 1905 at a young age, 15 or 16. He didn't remember. And my mother came several years later. She came over in 1919. And my grandparents were also immigrated from Greece.
They came after their children or before?
Well, my grandfather came first, and then my grandmother followed 7 or 8 years later. My mother was 7 years old when she came to this country. So he came here, found employment, and then sent for her.
And where did they first, do you know where they came to?
They came to Kansas City.
Directly.
By way of Chicago, and which was an interesting story in itself. Of course, they didn't speak the language. They came in at, my father, speaking of, came in at Ellis Island, and they just put a name tag on him, and there were other immigrants there that got him to the train station to go to Kansas City, so they knew he was going to Kansas City. Well, he didn't know how far Kansas City was. So every time the train stopped, he'd want to get up and think he was there. And of course, it made many stops between New York and Chicago. He had friends and relatives in Chicago that were supposed to meet him at the terminal in Chicago when he got there. So that was his first stop. But when he got off, there was no one there to meet him. So they told him not to leave, just stay there. Others that were passing through because he was, didn't know what to do. He was in the terminal. So he was in the terminal for several days, 2 or 3 days, before his cousin, one of his relatives, showed up, and they thought he was due that day. They didn't know. But he said while he was there, all the other people that were meeting others made sure he had food, and gave him encouragement, and asked him his name, and tried to find out where he was.
And these were mostly also Greek immigrants?
Greeks,
there were enough
yes.
Greek immigrants to keep him,
Right.
to take care of him on the road.
To
even
see
though
that, and
he
to give
was-
him,
yeah.
encouragement to stick around, don't leave. Well, he finally hooked up with his relatives, and then they decided that he should go to Kansas City. And he had friends there and relatives there from the village and the areas in Greece where he came from.
And do you know what village?
Kandila, on the Peloponnese. It's a little village. The word Kandila means candle in Greek, because this village was right in the valley, and it was surrounded by mountains, and there was only one way in and one way out. And I was fortunate enough to be able to visit that village in 1962. So I'm sorry, 63. But he, as so many other immigrants, went to work in the packing houses.
So he was in Chicago just a very short while and got put back on the train.
Put back on the train to Kansas City.
With the label for Kansas City.
Right. And others met him there.
And was his name Bay at the time?
No,
Do you
his
know
name
that?
was Belishotis.
Bay. How do you spell that?
Belissiotis.
Shotis.
And after my visit to Greece, my cousin informed me that our real name was Kosmas, Kosmas. But my father was born in the village of Belus, and that village was destroyed by earthquake. So they moved to the Kandila, So they called them the people from Bellis. And the name Belishotis, you know, stuck. So that's the name that he took.
Huh.
And we had other cousins, you know, that whose names were Belishotis, but that was the reason. They were from the village of Bellis that was
It
destroyed.
was destroyed by an earthquake in the late 19th century, early.
Yeah, it had to be
Yeah.
because his father, you know, came to that village. And
Huh.
he came there.
Right.
He was,
Right.
you know.
That's so interesting. So he gets the name Bay when he lands in this country.
Well, he went to work for the railroad. That was his first job, and then
This is your
my father.
father when he first gets to Kansas City.
Right, he went to work for the railroad, and he was the one that carried the water, did all the errands because he didn't know the work or anything. That's why they started him as a water boy. You know. So they say, well, here comes Mike Billy Shittis, and they'd all start laughing, and he'd laugh, and he didn't know what they were laughing about. He thought, you know. So when he found out what they were doing to him, that they were calling him, you know, Mike Billy, you know what, he decided he was going to change his name. He wasn't going to live with that kind of stigma. So at that time, you could change your name easily.
Yeah.
And so he changed it to Bay. He figured nobody's going to be able to make a mistake with that. Well, little did he know that if you spell it wrong, now you become Turkish. Because B-E-Y is a Turkish name. So that became an issue.
It's
Now you had to be
as big a danger as the other.
Oh, much worse.
Much
stigma.
worse.
So that's how we got the name Bay. And my mother's maiden name was Kanakatis.
Can we spell that too?
K-A-N-A-K-A-R-E-S.
Okay.
And he was from the same village as my father.
They both came from.
From Bellis and went to Kandila.
They both were in the village that was destroyed by the
Well,
earthquake, and then
right,
they both went
and
to
they-
Kandila.
But then they separated because he actually moved to another village, his family did, called Levidi, which was just a few miles away, a few kilometers away. And that's where he met my grandmother in this other village.
Oh, okay.
So they used to tease one another. My father used to pick on my grandfather a lot. And he'd say that your village never had any water because they had springs from the mountains in Kandila. And he says it was so bad in your village that the frogs would turn yellow because they didn't have any water. that was something that it just irritated.
Insult.
Yeah.
So he gets to Kansas City. He's working on the railroad. He meets your mother early on. Is that what you started?
No, of course my grandfather came shortly after my father over there, and you know they became reacquainted, of course, and we had a little community. Everybody lived in little communities. You know, we had a little Greek community where the church was the center of activity, and we had, you know, the Irish had their little communities, and the Polish.
In Kansas City.
Yes, in Kansas City, Kansas.
And lots of places other too.
Yeah, and they were just, you know, they're clustered in the Kansas City, Kansas area, all around the railroads and the packing houses, and that's where everybody found employment. And of course, the railroads in the early 1900s were really, you know, the growth thing. When the packing houses moved in, and you know, everybody worked there. All the immigrants had worked at one place or another there. And that's what kept them going. And until my mother worked in the packing house until 1951 when we had a big flood in Kansas City, and we lost everything in that flood.
So what were they each doing when you were born, around 1938?
1938.
Were you the first kid?
Yes, I have a twin brother. We're not identical, and that's it. Just the two of us. My mother was working at the packing house. My father had found other employment with a manufacturing company that made bottle caps for milk bottles. At that time, we used to get milk in glass bottles. And my grandfather was working for a rendering company that rendered carcasses from the
And the
packing houses, which
yeah.
was adjacent to the packing houses, which was pretty heavy, hard work. And that was, and of course, the war came along, in the 40s. And my mother, of course, everybody was on a huge, round-the-clock schedule. They would leave in the dark and come home in the dark. And really, the only time we'd have together would be like on a Sunday, because they worked almost 7 days a week most of the time.
Both your mother and your father.
Right.
And so who took care of you?
My grandmother. She stayed at home. She couldn't speak English, so it was a matter of survival. We spoke Greek, and we lived in a Mexican neighborhood which was adjacent to us. And we, at that time, as kids, we were fluent in Greek and Spanish. So when we went to school, we couldn't speak English, very little English. Went to grade school. So my grandmother really raised us, because everybody else was
working nonstop,
nonstop
during the war.
during the war. And I can remember, the kids that went to war, that were from the community, would always stop by and, say goodbye, because they didn't know if they were coming back. They were scared to death. I remember the Pappas family had 3 boys that went to war, and fortunately they all came back. And so the wartime was pretty tough, because there was a lot of sacrifices. You had a lot of rationing going on with fuel and food and sugar and chocolate and rubber, and you couldn't get a lot of things. But we managed to survive through it, and my father was a carpenter, just I guess by natural, because he would buy a little house and rebuild it in his spare time, which was not very much spare time, but so we had 3 little houses, 1 big house and 2 little houses, and that was his nest egg. But when the flood came along in 1951, we lost it all.
Oh,
So
no insurance?
No, nobody had flood insurance then.
That must have been devastating.
Yeah, it was, because my father was very much older than my mother. He was at least 30 years older than my mother. And that was kind of the way things went, the old-timers would get established before they'd, marry, and they'd have, be able to afford a family and so forth. That was, and a lot of
Yeah.
marriages were kind of arranged, so to speak.
Do you think theirs was? Let me just close this door. This is
Yeah, it's getting a little loud.
So,
Well,
in your childhood, did you learn about unions
oh yeah,
from anybody in your family or community?
yes, from both parents, but my mother mostly, because she worked in the packing house. And at that time, they were all on piecework, and there was no union. So she worked at the pork trim, where they trimmed the hams. And piecework, of course, you get paid by the number of pieces that you produce in a day. So at night, we would, in order to save her time, she would have us, my brother and I, tear up grocery sacks, brown grocery sacks, cut them into strips, and put her number, which was 535, and a black crayon on it. And we would make, dozens of those stacks, so that she didn't have to take the time to write it.
Oh, because she had to label each of her pieces.
Every
her
piece
done
she had to stick it on.
And if she had to do that during the day, it would
Yeah,
take an extra.
and that's what she got credit for at the end of the
Huh.
day. So, we did that, and then I remember when the unions, the packing house union, started to organize, and there was a lot of excitement. I didn't, recall too much of it, but I mean, I just remember the talk that went on, and that she joined the union, and things got much better.
They did.
Yeah, they, of course, they had problems along the way, but they were all pleased because they had at least some, control over their work environment and safety, because the packing houses were a very dangerous place to work. I mean, there were no,
Yeah.
safety rules, and that was the other thing. My father would sharpen her knives at night because she had these fillet knives. When they trimmed the pork, you have to have a sharp knife. You got a dull knife, you're not going to get much work done. But those things would come down the line, and you'd be working as fast as you could, and people would come by. I mean, people lost hands and fingers and
Huge numbers of injuries.
serious accidents. Yeah.
Now, how come you can visualize it? Did you ever visit? I mean, it sounds like you know what it looks like
now that
exactly,
you mention it,
just from your
I did visit.
description.
We did visit, and because we were interested, and my mother did take us there as very small when we were very young during the war, and shortly thereafter. Yeah, it's strange that you asked that, but I did. Most of the Greeks in that community worked at the packing houses. We had Swifts, Cudahy's, and Armours. And then there were some local packers like Wilson's. But they were big in the Kansas City area. And even today, not so much today, but in recent years, I would see some of the old timers that worked in the packing houses, and they would always comment about how my mother was the best person I ever had on that pork trim line. I mean, because they had supervisory positions, and they were amazed at how fast she could work and how good she worked.
Huh.
And they always commented about that, so that she was good at it.
Right.
And they also used to exchange food, because she used to come home with these burritos, and she'd take Greek food there, and they would swap
They'd
food.
switch.
Yeah. And it was quite an ethnic blend there. Different foods and different people.
And did the family participate in union activities after the union came in?
My mother, of course, would go to meetings. She
Mhm.
never was an activist, but she'd go to meetings, and she stayed pretty much informed on what went on because, it was her livelihood, and her welfare was. And I know that they were really proud of the union, happy the union was there.
And the plant your father was in?
It was not a union plant. It was privately owned. It wasn't a big facility, but he worked there until he had a severe heart attack, and then he finally had to retire. And my brother actually went to work there too.
In the same plant?
Yeah, later on.
Huh.
So we would go to work together. That's when I went into service. My brother stayed home, and.
So you went to high school in Kansas City?
Yes, I went to high school, Central High School, Kansas City, and
And you almost finished?
yes, almost. I thought I had enough credits, but I was a half credit short because I had taken typing, and they only give you a half a credit, not a full credit for typing. So when I left in April of 1956, which was just 2 months before graduation, I discovered later that I didn't have enough credits to graduate because of the way they computed the different classes. So, I later got my GED while I was in the service.
But you left before the end of the year because you were anxious to get out of there, or?
Well, we had reasons for leaving. I had a friend who just recently passed that got into trouble, and they were threatening to put him into Boys Town somewhere. So we were pretty close, my brother and he and I and a few others, and we got separated in school because I guess we were kind of problematic. I wasn't allowed to go to the same school with my brother, and he wasn't allowed to go to the same school with either one of us, so we got sent to 3 different schools. And then he got into trouble before doing so. I don't know what his trouble was, but his father came to me and wanted to know if I wouldn't go with him in the service to keep him from, going to Boys Town or wherever they were going. Some Boonville was the place for bad boys. So I talked to my father, and I was really, I had joined the reserves, the Marine Corps Reserves, the fall before, just interested in it. And so I was going to reserve meetings in Olathe, Kansas, which was nearby. And so I talked to my father about just going active. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do anyway. And I worked I threw papers all through high school. That was my first job after the flood. And I worked at the grocery store on the weekends. So, I just needed to get an education, and we'd lost everything, and knew we couldn't afford it. And my father was up in years. He was 67 years old then, and here I was 17. And I knew it was it was heartbreaking for him because he had nothing.
He had a hard life, I think. Your father. Do you think he dreamed of providing you with an education before the flood came and took that?
Yeah.
So this seemed like the best thing to do at the time, in a way.
He had to sign.
To let you go because
Let
you're
me go, so
underage. Yeah.
So he met the wrath of my mother,
Oh, yes.
who said that, if you can't let that boy go like that. What if he gets killed? What if this happens? And so I knew it was tough on him to do that. But he knew.
What did he say to you?
Well, he just said to me that he wants me to do what I think I need to do, and not to worry that he would always be there, and he would take care of my mother, and don't worry about that. He would deal with that, and just stay in touch, and don't get any tattoos, and don't gamble. That was his instructions to me. So on that note, we signed up for the Marine Corps.
The two of you, your
Two of us, my
friend
buddy
and-
Bill
yeah.
Wilsey, and I, and we had a night out on the town, and got in trouble again, and landed in the jug.
What did you do?
I don't know. I had a '49 Ford convertible, and for some reason, we were driving through. We had a few beers, and maybe more than we should have. And in Kansas, you could drink when you're 18. In Missouri, you had to be 21. So everybody went across the state line. Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, just a street that separated us. And you could get your beer there. But on our way back, there was a school stop sign, and I had a convertible and had the top down. This was in April. And my buddy Bill decided we needed that stop sign, so he put the stop sign in the back of the car. and we forgot about it. So we're driving around, and we were speeding, and the police came after us. So we thought we could ditch them, and we went into a neighborhood and pulled into a driveway, and we thought, well, we don't see this guy, he's not going to find us. But we left the lights on, the headlights on our car. So he drove right up behind us, and we wondered, how did this guy find us, And we said, how did you know we were here? He said, you dummies, you left your headlights on. You see your lights going there. So anyway, off we go. And then my poor father had to come bail us out the next day with the recruiting sergeant. And he gave us both $20 bills, and they took us from jail to the airport, put us on an airplane, and put him in charge of me. That was just, the buddy system. So we were off to San Diego, flying on TWA, the hometown airline. And I think it must have made, it stopped everywhere.
Oh, really?
Wichita, Tulsa, Oak City, Amarillo, and the one stop that I remember was Las Vegas, and which was it was a very small airport at that time. So I said, well, we better get something to eat, Bill. Let's go in and get a hot dog. So we had time. We went in, got a hot dog. They gave us $19 silver dollars back. Now, these dollars are heavy, right?
Yeah.
So that was my first memory of Las Vegas, and then we went on to San Diego and made our call. I made the call and told them we were there. Some very gruff speaking person told us to get our butts out there, and they'd be there to get us. So I told my buddy Bill, I said, I think we made a mistake here. I think we ought to just move on and go to Mexico or somewhere, because I don't know if we're going to like this. I said, this guy was not nice on the phone. And Bill said, oh, Alex, what are you making my stories up for? I said, I'm telling you, Bill, we're looking for a heap of trouble here. So here comes this little pickup in this army green. This guy jumps out of the truck, and Bill was smoking a cigarette. Had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Slapped that cigarette in his face, grabbed him out of the seat of his pants, and threw him in the back of that pickup. And he looks at me, and I was in there. And that's how it started.
Oh, dear.
Yep. So that was a great experience.
So you all made it through boot camp together?
We did. It was a challenge, but we made it. And we went on, and I went to avionics school, and Bill went to hydraulics, and so we separated then. We both went to Memphis for schooling, and then he stayed there, and I went on to North Carolina, to Cherry Point, North Carolina. And I was attached to a Marine squadron, all-weather squadron. We flew all-weather jets, jamming radar and that sort of thing.
And so you were
I was
fixing
in the
the
air
jets.
wing, actually, yeah.
What did you actually?
I'd worked on the avionics, on the electronics, and that was my trade, my MOS, as they called it.
And so you stayed there in South Carolina
No,
to do that, or
that
you
was short.
You traveled with?
We had a base
Your
there.
squadron
We were
traveled.
no, a squadron was based there,
Okay.
and I took some bad advice and from a friend of mine that was there, and he says, they're not going to take a couple of weeks off. Nobody finds out what you do around here. And just come on, we'll go play down at the beach. So foolishly I did that. When I got back and checked in, the sergeant there at the electronics shop said, so you're Private Bay? I said, yes, sir. Where have you been? Well, I've been here. You've been where? So he says, you know, we got some things you need to do first before you get actually doing your trade work. The mess hall needs some help. And then after that, we probably need some guard duty. So I spent 90 days on mess duty, 30 days on guard duty. And this was between August and December. And I went to him in December and asked if I could go home and leave, you know, because my father was ill. No, he says, we can't do that. You gotta do your guard duty. So I said, okay. So I did my guard duty, went back to, finally got through with all of that nonsense and went to the shop, and he called me in, and he said, I didn't know that your father was really that ill. And he said, I'll make it up to you if you, he says, I'm sorry about that. He says, if you want to, people have been waiting for years to go to Japan. If you want to go to Japan, he says, I'll let you go to Japan. We got a person we need to send there to Iwakuni, Japan. I said, put me on the boat. So I went home on leave, and I visited with my family, and then I shipped out for Japan on a troop ship, which was another experience. I was fortunate I didn't get sick, but a lot of them did. We went, it took us 21 days to get there. And the Marines always go in the hole. You know, that's the least comfortable place. Hardly any ventilation, and stacked 4 and 5 high on these little cots. But so I got to Japan, and which was a great experience.
How long were you there?
I was there about 14 months, and they didn't want you to get too happy there, so they wanted to try to make you go back. They didn't want you to stay or read, because you do enjoy it there. It was quite a nice, good, it was good duty. And
You live on the base, but you spend time in.
you had liberty, yeah, and so, and it was a wide open at that time. You know, it was crazy, it really was. So we had a good time, and I spent my 19th birthday in Hong Kong. They sent us from Japan to Hong Kong for R&R. I mean, it was all R&R in Japan. But if you wanted to go, you could go on one of those military hops and spend 3 days in Hong Kong and come back. And then I came back all the way back to North Carolina again. And that's where I finished up. And while I was home on leave, I met my wife, who I hadn't seen since she was 4 or 5 years old. She'd grown up a lot.
She'd grown up in Kansas City also?
Yeah, she was Greek, and also part of the church that we went to in Kansas. And
So how'd you meet?
well,
Again.
I was on leave from Japan, and then there was a function. I don't think it was a wedding, but some kind of a church social. And so I went, and my family, we went, and I saw her, you know, very stunning, very beautiful. And I didn't remember her, you know, who she was, and then, you know, we got introduced somehow, and we went out with a bunch of other kids and had, I don't know, barbecue or something afterwards together. And I asked her out, and we dated and decided that we had a lot in common, and so we wrote to one another, and I had about 6 months left to do. And I got out, time together.
She was still there.
And decided, this was the right thing to do. And we've been married for almost 51 years now, so it was the right thing.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
So you came back and you already had a girlfriend, but you didn't have a job. How'd you find a job?
Well, when I came back, I was really wanted to take time off and just loaf for the summer. And I thought, a couple of days, I thought, well, I'll go down to the airport and see if anybody's hiring. I really got tired of loafing already. I just
A
wasn't.
couple days of loafing.
Yeah. And I knew that I wanted to go to work for an airline because of my avionics background and working with aircraft in the service. And so I went to the airport, and of course the biggest carrier in Kansas City, the hometown airline, was TWA. I thought, well, I'll just stop there and see what's going on. And they were at the old airport there. And I went in there, and they were very, very interested, and I filled out the application, and they made some calls, and they said, we'd like for you to go to work tomorrow. I said, oh, no, I can't go to work tomorrow. Well, we need you there. I says, these jobs are pretty hard to come by, and which they really weren't, but they wanted to. They had a quota they wanted to meet. They filled. So I says, how about Monday? This was like a Thursday or maybe a Friday. He says, okay, we'll you be sure you report there. I said, okay. So I did on that following Monday. And they said I wanted to work on a line and they said, yeah, you can do that, the flight line. And that was the beginning of my.
What's a flight line?
The flight line was like at the airport,
Uh-huh.
where you worked outside, did the maintenance work on the airplanes,
And that's what you wanted to do?
that's what I wanted to do. I did not want to be inside in a workshop.
Oh, I see.
know,
You wanted to be out there working on the planes as opposed to
Yeah.
inside working on them?
And because they said that there were several openings. There was the radio shop, the instrument shop, the hangar, and I didn't know anything about the hangar. And this was the overhaul facility in Kansas City. So they said, do you want to, I thought he was giving me a choice, but it wasn't that way. They were saying that they would put me in one of those places. So when I get there, they stick me in the instrument shop. And this is like a sterile, they do, worked on all the instruments on the aircrafts. And, I complained to the supervisor. I said, I didn't want to be here. They told me I could be on the line. Well, this is the way it is. You either come to work here and you want to work here, and this is where you're going to work. I said, okay. And they said, you can, if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. I thought, wow, these people are really nice. So here I am working there, and my lead mechanic, he knew I was very unhappy. And I said, look, how do I get out of here? Isn't there some way I can move or transfer? This is a big company. They got all these other things. Why can't I go down? You got to get your probation in. Get your probation in, he says, and then you can bid. But he says it's hard to get out of these places because they have what they call a qualifications committee. 2 union, 2 company, and 1 chairman. He's the company, and they decide whether you can move or not. So I was wanting to move as soon as I got there, and I put in for the transfers. And when you do that, you get on their list. So then they started,
Looking at you.
yeah, everything, which, I knew my job. My lead, I had a good lead. I was very lucky. He looked out after me and made sure I knew what to do. And,
He's the one who taught you in the first place?
yeah,
Because
we had what they called colonies. There were 10 people. We had 2 rows of benches, and it looked like a watchmaker's you know, because we worked on instruments,
Right.
and it had to be clean and sterile and everything. So the lead was in charge of this colony, which had 10 people, and we must have had 20 colonies in this instrument shop. It was just a huge, you know. So he would introduce me to new instruments that show me how to overhaul or repair or check them out. And then this foreman, though, kept trying to move me around. And he said, no, I got him working on it. You know, he tried to, as much as he could,
Trying to protect you.
protect me.
Mm.
But it got to where it was, you know, it was getting pretty tough on him, too. So when I put in for my transfer, they really started to, you know, home in on him as much as me. And I went to I did it 3 times, 3 qualifications committee reviews. And, you know, it was a stacked court, you know. But the general foreman, whose name was Renwall, was an ex-Marine. And the shop foreman checked my record and found out that I had been arrested. You know, that was the time before we went to service. So he went and checked my employment application, and I didn't show any arrests on there.
Mm.
So he said that I falsified my employment record, which subjected me to immediate dismissal. So the general foreman, Renwall, calls me in, and he says, tell me what happened here, Alex. So I told him, my buddy Bill and I were on leave, and, you know, we got running around in our old neighborhood, and cops chased us, and they caught us, and we stopped and got out. And this cop just took the club to my buddy Bill for no reason, you know, and I just, you know, lost it. Went after the cop. Next thing I know, there was other cops, and we were both, you know, taken off to jail again. And all I was trying to do was protect him from really hurting him. But, you know, he says, okay. He said, well, why did you not put it on your record? I said, because my father hired an attorney, and it cost him $5,000, and he said he was going to clear my record, and there would be no record. But you can't clear a record like that, you know.
It's a felony.
Yeah. And he didn't know that, and we were assured that there was no record. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said, you know, otherwise. Okay. I said, Alex says, I know you want out of here, and I think you're a good man, a good young man. And he says, I want to help you. I'm the chairman of that qualifications committee. But he says, I can't protect you in the hangar because you start all over again. You know, this was one of the fallacies of our contract. That's what got me involved. So you start all over again with a new trial period, which means you can be fired for
Right.
reason or no reason. It's not a probation, it's a trial. Okay. I said, just get me down there. I'll make it. Okay, so we had another review, and he overrode the committee and sent me down. So, again, my good fortune was a good lead man, Charlie Stumberger, and he says, you let old Charlie stay under Charlie's wing here now. Little Greek boy says, they're looking for you. That's the way it is around here. You know, they don't want you moving around. So the whistle would blow. My first day, the whistle blew for everybody to go on break, and I started to go out with them, and the foreman came over and he says, come here, man. He says, you don't go to break. He says, you're on probation down here. You walk around under these wings and you pick up all the nuts and bolts. He says, you don't take breaks. Oh. I looked at Charlie, and Charlie says, I said, okay. So Charlie says, you gotta stick with it, kid, you know. I said, all right. So I made my probation, you know, and they gave me all the junk jobs. You know, we had these old Connies then still, had these superchargers. We had to change them, the cells of these engines. Dirty, greasy work. That was my job. Plus picking up nuts and bolts during breaks. But I made it through that time, and then I decided I'm going to LA. I'm getting away from here. So I put my bid in for LA. And
Now, were you married at this time?
yes, I did. I got married in 1961, which was a year after I went to work there. And our son was born on the same day a year later. So
Easy
it's
to
easy to
remember.
easy to remember both days.
That's excellent.
Yeah. So I put a bid in, and I was awarded a bid, and on my bid I was to be reporting. I worked the afternoon shift on the following morning at 8 o'clock. Was it possible even to get there, you know? So I went in to see the grievance committee, and they were busy with a card game, and I told them what my problem was, and they looked up and said, well, are you being forced to go? I said, no, I bid. They said, well, then that's your problem. So I said, well, how am I going to get there? You know, you got to find a way. You can turn it down. So that was my a bad experience, I thought.
So you had joined the union when you first walked in the door?
That's right. That's my father and mother both said, join the union as soon as you can, so if there's a union there. So you weren't required to join the union immediately until you went through your trial period.
Right.
When I joined the first week, I went down, I found that union hall and went down and I joined immediately. And they said, well, you don't have to do that. You don't have to pay dues because you'd get fired. I said, no, I'm gonna join anyway. So I joined the union immediately, became a union member.
And then it's
Just a
like a
week
year
after.
later that you're put in for the transfer and you go in and they're
Yeah,
not helping you.
and the committee is busy.
So that was your first real,
That was my first, you know, I thought,
first time you needed them, I guess.
yeah. And I didn't know any that much about unions, and I thought, you know, I was lucky I had a good lead man. I had a good shop steward in the shop too, who helped me through those qualification meetings, and who went with me and argued in my behalf. So I had good experiences until then. So I went to Charlie, my lead man, and Charlie says, well, he says, that's been a problem around here for a few years, you know. But he said, the only thing you can do, Alex, is go up to industrial relations and tell them your problem and see if they can't work it out for you. So they should be able to give you vacation or do something. So I did. I went up, and they were very good about it and worked it out and said, now you got to be sure you get there. Now we're going to give you a week. So you take your vacation and get there, because I was going to move my whole family there. And this was just before Christmas.
Uh,
So I didn't fly. I drove. Had a little Volkswagen at the time. Loaded it up. And with the trailer, finally had to abandon the trailer and ship everything, because the little Volkswagen can't pull a trailer. I thought it could, but it didn't. And drove into California. And got caught in the panhandle in a big ice storm and had to spend the night in Tucumcari, New Mexico. Terrible storms at that time of year, you know. But finally made it into LA. I was amazed.
And you got your family in the car with you?
No,
No.
they stayed behind. And then I had to look for a place to stay. I didn't have a place. So I had a couple of days, so I'm driving around neighborhoods, and there was a guy out painting in this little neighborhood, a little house between two big apartment buildings. So I got out, went up, talked to him, and I told him what I was doing. It was Hawthorne, California, which was near the airport. And it was kind of a duplex. It was a large house, and he made a little apartment off one side of it. He was painting it and the outside. I said, look, I really need a place to stay. I don't know anything about this place, you know. And I said, I'll help you paint, get this done, and, you know, so I have a place to just park. Okay, all right. I said, my wife and son will be, I said, I don't know about having any kids. I said, well, he's just a 2-year-old. Not quite 2. So I said, why don't, you know, you see them. If you don't like them, give us an opportunity to find another place and we'll move. Well, they fell in love with us.
So you took the apartment that was.
I took the apartment,
that he had.
lived there, helped him paint,
Yeah.
and then got my wife and son there. Well, they flew out, and then we stayed there all the time we were in California, you know, which wasn't very long, just long enough for me to go back because I couldn't afford it.
Couldn't afford to stay in California?
You know, it was very expensive. I wanted a house.
The job paid the same as Kansas City, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
living costs were
Much higher.
really different.
Yeah. And to be able to afford something, I'd have to be moving a long way from the airport. I didn't want to do that. Didn't want to travel. So we looked and we tried to make it, you know, I mean, we loved California, but it was just financially it wasn't going to work unless we wanted to live in an apartment, you know.
Right.
And I didn't want to do that. So that was a good experience, and then I just got involved with the union there.
In Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles, yes, we had more difficulty. Of course, I was very junior. I didn't have a lot of seniority, so I was not a threat to anybody there. So I wasn't met with a lot of resistance. Just a lot of jokes, you know, about the Midwest and where's that cow stuff on your boots and where's your boots, and, you know. And I got stuck on a night, yeah, you know, shop stuff. And I got stuck on a night shift, and which was I couldn't handle the night shift, midnight shift. I just couldn't. Just didn't
The
agree with
graveyard
me.
shift.
Yeah.
That's very hard on.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat.
Constitution.
You know, everything was just upside down, different. You know, just I wasn't used to it. So we had some problems with management there, and they wanted to. They had problems communicating with people because everybody lived a long way from work. You know, they all tried to find places they could afford, so
Right.
it's not in the LA area, especially not around Inglewood or El Segundo or those places, or Torrance. So they had lived out in West Covina, they lived out in the valley. Long way, and they
there
had
was traffic even
oh,
then.
yeah,
I grew
yeah.
up in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay, so you know, even
Yeah.
then.
There was
Yeah.
traffic then.
Oh, it's awful. So they would have a lot of forced overtime, which they would declare an emergency.
Mm.
That became an issue with us. And then they'd just be selective. They wouldn't go by seniority. They'd just say, oh, you got to stay over. No warning, no consideration for whether you had anything going. You stayed. So, because people were always on the go, they were busy going back and forth to get home and go to work. We decided at the lodge meeting that maybe we should, establish a newsletter that we could distribute at work and keep everybody informed of what's going on.
Because it was hard to get people meetings because of the
Yes,
schedule.
right.
Yeah.
And one person had made a stab at it, and I guess he, it was a hit and miss thing. So I offered to take it over and do what I could, and he offered to help. He just didn't want to do it all. So which worked out well. So together, and with the cooperation of the officers, we put out a newsletter and just focused on the issues and just and what we were trying to do, because there were, people always grumbled and they try to blame, a lot of times blame the wrong people, because you're only able to accomplish, whatever support you have. I mean, if you have the support of people, you can do a lot of things. But if they're confused, or they got misconceptions on where you're going, it's hard, and the company takes advantage of that. So, but with the newsletter, it really helped. It really did, and they look forward to it. We put it in our little electronic shack. They'd come by and grab a copy.
How many pages?
Well, it varied, but normally we try to do just a fold over, one of these 17-inch.
Like a 4-page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something that we could print on both sides and fold
Yeah.
in half,
Yeah.
and and then if we wanted to, we could mail it too, which we did on hot issues. We had a nonprofit postage thing so that we could,
Right.
that time you didn't even have to sort, but so it made it easy. But you have
And people really read it.
they did, they did, and it bothered the company a lot. Well, they were the first ones to read it. They grabbed one as soon as they could.
I bet.
Yeah.
Now, you did the writing and the drawing and the layout and the
Yeah.
printing?
Right. We did it all. Yeah.
How'd
It-
you print it?
We had a mimeograph. We didn't have any printing press. We just used a mimeograph, stencils.
Purple, yeah.
Yeah, the old stencils,
Stencils,
the typewriter, and white out. So you made mistakes, and then we try to space it. Get columns. I mean, it was very difficult to do that. But we took a lot of pride in it, and we made a nice, nice little not pictures, because we didn't have picture capability then, but we did a lot of drawings, and
You did the drawing yourself?
No, we had
Did you have some?
we had some talented people around there
Yeah.
that like to do those things,
Cartoons?
cartoons, and very effective cartoons. You could use your imagination.
So
And
what
the-
was one of the issues where the newsletters flew off the table fastest?
Well, the big one was the forced overtime, and we kept that running account on that, because almost everybody was affected by that, because it was so, it just we used to get a lot of fog, so the company didn't need to have some people, but our position was you should have a procedure for that. You should have a procedure for regular overtime. Have a turn system. Don't force somebody unless you need a special skill.
Right.
And then you need to, come to the union and let us know what it is you need, and we'll provide, we'll work with you to get the right people to do the job that needs to be done. We're not trying to be, an obstacle, obstruction.
Yeah.
So that's what we were shooting for. And we had a lot of meetings, but they didn't want to lose control, so they just didn't want to give it up. So that was one of our big ones. The other one was an attendance policy issues, where they had some new industrial relations people that decided that they need to crack down on sick leave and abusers. Okay, nobody wants to take issue with an abuser. If you got an abuser, we need to deal with it. But then they started trying to just do systems that would fit all situations, and no system that works that way. So you could catch your abusers, but then you also hurt others that really were legitimate because of just this numbers game. I mean, their philosophy was, you got this many days off in a year, or that's it. You've got a problem, we need to take action, and you need to straighten out your problem. the ones that had the problems, I mean, they were pretty obvious, you know, there was always a Friday or a Monday or a day or before or after a holiday, you know, I mean, why not just go after the problem instead of trying to do a policy? So that became an issue. And it wasn't just localized there in Los Angeles, because when I go back to Kansas City, it was a bigger issue. And that was really one of our big strike issues.
You were in Los Angeles not during a contract renewal time, so you
There was
shouldn't have.
there was a contract renewal, but it was not very well publicized, and it was before I'd gotten there. So I wasn't even aware of it. I think it was in '62 they had a contract, and it was ratified.
And your newsletter, did it have international news or news from the international or from other
Well, the internet,
locations, or it was really focused
just
on your
mostly
plant?
on TWA and, you know, work related with
Los
our plant.
Angeles.
And if there were some other issues, like, which would be international stuff, would be dues and per capita tax, or
Right,
some sick, excuse me,
it's okay.
that's my brother, I forgot.
I'll press pause. So we're back. I guess you're just about to leave Los Angeles.
Yeah.
How'd you make that decision?
Well, there was a restriction on bidding. Once you bid out on the system, you had a 12-month restriction, so you could not
Couldn't.
be accepted for a bid. You could, during that year. So when I hit my 12 months, I put my bid in.
For Kansas City.
Right. And
And you didn't, it wasn't a dilemma. You and your wife didn't have to.
no.
It was clear to you that that was a good move.
And she
That's what you needed
agreed
to
with
do.
it too.
Yeah.
And we had a good time in California, you know. I went to Knott's Berry, went to Disneyland. I mean, and everybody came to visit us. That's where they wanted to go, so, you know, it was really nice. We enjoyed California. But we didn't think we wanted to raise our son there and any other kids if we had any more, which we didn't. But, so we decided to go back to Kansas City, where we could probably afford to have a home and a nice yard and, you know, more property, and so we did that. And I was fortunately in a couple of months I was awarded a bid to go back to the flight line at the airport in
Which is
Kansas
what
City.
you'd wanted from the
Which is
get-go.
what I wanted from the beginning, yeah. And of course, in LA, I was actually working the line. Because it was a line station, so we did overnight maintenance checks on aircraft, and then got them ready for flights the next day. And plus, we also worked the gates at the airport, at the LA airport, because you always had maintenance problems, you know,
Right.
that you had to correct. So it was right down my alley, and I really loved it there. That was the work I wanted to do. So I get back to Kansas City, and this had to be in, I don't know, '64 maybe. I think it was '64. Go to the airport, and the old timers that worked the airport were the union people that were held office for many, many years, and they were part of the original establishment, union establishment, that was formed in 1946. And Hal Smith was known as the union orator, and he worked there at the airport. He was an avionics person and was active in the union and active in the union politics, which I was not, you know, at that time. I mean, I was a steward in California, and I was a steward, became a steward when I went
Shortly after you came
yeah.
back.
because I was asked if I would be a steward. Nobody wanted to be the steward because I guess they were having a hard time. I said, sure, I'll be a steward. So Al Smith came to me and he talked out of the side of his mouth and he said, we got an election coming up for the district and boy, old Cliff don't look good. So, he's doing a number on the guy that he'd been supporting for years, So he's trying to get me on his side politically. So I listened to him and, I didn't agree or disagree because I wasn't sure what was going on, politically. But they were very subtle in a lot of ways and then pretty clear on where they wanted to go. And the airport was pretty much the camp, the leadership camp at that time. But there was always conflict between the airport and the overhaul base. There was that separation there. It was a funny thing. It was just like the overhaul base was a huge facility, and we had at that time probably 4,000 workers there. And the airport, maybe you had 100, maybe 150 total of everything. And it was a small scale LA operation because we did overnight work checks. And at that time we still had the Connies, so we had those and we worked them inside, and we had the jets that we worked outside. So I was working on the jet fleet because that's what I was familiar with from LA because they had most of the jets out there, or a lot of them. And we had a problem with we had a lot of electrical problems with landing gear on the jet aircraft, and they would get ridden up and at the airport, you would have to sign the log to release an airplane if you had an airworthy item that was what they call a squawk written in the logbook. The pilot would enter a discrepancy on what system was at fault, like landing gear, false warning light. The gear wasn't fully either extended or
retracted.
Yeah. And that was a serious item, of course. So you had to release. You couldn't release the aircraft without a full check, and then you had to sign for it, and then you certified it that
it was now working.
That it was working, or you corrected the problem, or whatever. Well, we had one airplane that must have had a dozen or so of these continuous write-ups. So. And this was wintertime, and I was out there working on it, and we didn't have an inside facility, so we're right next to the river there in Kansas City, and it's cold, but I'm checking the system out, and I was told we got to get this plane ready. It's got to make a flight in the morning here. This was a night
So you're
shift.
working at the airport, not at the.
Now at the airport, yeah.
Okay.
I went to the airport in Kansas City.
I see. Okay.
I'm sorry.
You
yeah.
didn't go back to the refurbishing.
No, not
Yeah.
yet.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So, and they call us electromechanics in that under that job description there. But so I told the foreman, I said, we need to jack the plane and swing the gear to check to be sure that the doors are closing, all the switches are working, and that we don't have either an electrical problem or a hydraulic problem. Oh, we can't do that. We haven't got time to do that. I said, well, I can't sign this airplane off. I'm not going to certify that this is checked. That's what needs to be done. Of all the checks, nobody's ever swung the gear. I said, how you, because we used to do this at the overhaul base. And he says, just sign it. I said, no, I'm not going to sign it. You worked on it. You put in the logbook what you did. You sign it and kick it out. I said, no, I don't think I should do that, and I'm not going to do that. Well, we'll see about that. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, you can override me, you can sign it. Why don't you sign it if you think it's okay? I don't think it's okay. You don't have the right to make that decision. I said, no, I don't, but I have the right not to sign it. Well, I have the right to do something about it. Okay, but I'm not signing it. He signed it. The plane goes out. Guess what? The system failed
Doesn't-
again, and the pilot brings the plane back. Lands it. This foreman didn't lose his job, but he got in big trouble over it for signing it. Well, that was my one bad experience about how things worked, you know, with them just wanting to get
Yeah.
meet their schedules. And, you know, making the threat that, you know, and there was, you know, where do you go, you know? So then I learned when you start reading these regs, you don't need licensed mechanics. You know, to sign things, all you need is one person at an airport. And he can sign anything. And it's pretty scary, so.
It is scary.
So then, fast forward a little bit, I go to a local lodge meeting, and we're talking about sick leave problems, you know. And we had an emergency problems, and I got up and spoke to the president. I said, you know, seems to me that local lodge this size really needs a newspaper. You don't even have a newspaper here. You gotta be Alex Bay from Los Angeles. You're the new editor. That was the president of the local. I was dumbfounded. I said, we need a newspaper. You'll be the new editor. Okay, so I met with him after the meeting, and he said, whatever you need, you know, we need a paper bad. I said, well, okay. I said, where do I, you know, operate? So anyway, he showed me around. And so the establishment didn't want a newspaper. He was new local lodge president. He didn't have any help there. So they did everything to make it impossible to put a paper out.
The union establishment.
Yeah, the local lodge, you know.
How was
office.
he a new president when all the rest of them were there?
He got elected. You know,
Yeah.
they had elections at that time every year, and he got elected president, but none of the other officers were on his slate.
Got it. Okay.
So you know, the whole executive board was opposed to him. So he was, you know, thought enough about trying to. He knew what the problems were. Joe Bowman, he was a hell of a guy. So anyway, he said, well, we got a mimeograph machine, we got typewriters, we got paper, we got this office here. They're all locked up in this office here, and you can use this office. And I said, okay. So I said, when I get off at midnight, I'll come down and, you know, work it out. Well, I'd get off at midnight, either something was locked up, or the machine was, you know, inoperative, or the door to the local was locked. I couldn't get in. They wouldn't give me a key. Anyway, we got over that, and we started putting out the newsletter. And our big issue was sick leave. The employer took the position that irrespective of the nature of your illness, the seriousness of it, or whatever, if you couldn't come to work, you were a part-time employee, and we don't have part-time work. So you may have cancer, you may have a heart ailment, you may have any other disease that requires you to be off, and you have sick leave that you're taking, but we have the right to terminate your employment because you're unable to come to work.
And they set a number of days in a year. And
Well, they started with that. Then they went to the extreme and said that irrespective of your seniority, your service time, or the problems that you have, the medical problems you have, if you're unable to come to work, then we don't need to keep you employed. So they would fire. They fired people with 30, 35 years seniority for abuse of sick leave, that's what they called it, because they were off too much. So, we took that to arbitration and we lost it. The arbitrator ruled against us, saying that the employer has the right to expect its employees to come to work. I couldn't believe this,
Even if they're sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, you have sick leave provisions and, they've exhausted those. We even had medical leave provisions, but irrespective of that, they were terminated. So that,
You mean they could be on medical leave and they would be terminated?
yeah, they fine, they would just say, well, it's time for you to be looking elsewhere for employment because, we can't keep carrying you on the ropes.
Okay.
So, that was, that and the emergency overtime and, the, sick leave, or the attendance, enforcement policies that went into effect, became our big issues, and we were up for negotiations in 1965. Our contract had expired. So, we started using, making a record of everything that took place, all the people that were affected, and it became really, really a hot issue. Yeah, especially with, the older, and we had a lot of senior people there, because a lot of those, in the sixties, we had a lot of them that came back after the war and went to work for the airlines. Some of them that left and went to war and came back.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't all in good health, and so they identified with the problem and they supported us. So when we went into bargaining, that was our big issues. Unfortunately, we didn't have new leadership at the bargaining table. So they were trying to negotiate a contract and not really addressing those work rule issues. So we went on strike. This was the first time the airlines ever had coordinated bargaining like the auto workers do. We had 5 major airlines that went on strike at the same time. United, TWA, Eastern.
This is 1966.
United, TWA, Eastern, National, one more, Northwest. So everybody all the economic issues were going to be dealt with at the table, one table, just like they do in the auto industry. And all of the local issues be handled locally. Well, we had 5 major airlines. They had a lot of their own local issues. And the main bargaining table was just trying to deal with the economics, thinking that was going to solve it.
Right.
We had 3 ratification votes and rejected the contract every time. And at that time, Seemiller was the international president. And he got frustrated. And he called everybody in and really put it to them. What is going on here? Does anybody know what is happening? Lyndon Johnson was the president, and he was going to impose emergency fact-finding on us, and the wage and price guidelines were being threatened. And he was, how Johnson was, he probably called Seemiller in and told him, you better get this thing straight, or we're gonna, we can't shut this country down with 5 major airlines all on strike here, this country has come to a standstill, which it had, And the strike went on for 43 days until they finally decided to talk to the local leaders and find out what the issues were locally. And all of them were different. So we got some changes made to that provision. Didn't go as far as we wanted it to, but it was enough to pass the contract finally. 43 days of strike. Well, I need to back up a little bit because we had also had an election take place preceding that strike, and the existing representatives were defeated.
The
by
old timers.
the old timers, but they were at the bargaining table. They were the ones negotiating because the new officers weren't going to take office till August the 1st. And that's when that's in accordance with the bylaws, the strike started the end of July and was ongoing. So I was introduced to the person that was running against the president of the district, who was out of Chicago, by one of the old timers at the overhaul base, who said, "You need to go to Chicago, you need to meet John Schwinn, and we gotta make a change here." And I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't want to get involved. He said, "You gotta do it." He says, "You gotta do it. You need to do this." And I respected the old man, old Clarence Eden, 6-ply, he was a big guy. And so I went and committed myself to support his team in Kansas City. And from April, when the nominations took place, till then, the election was run in June. I worked for these outside candidates and, faced the wrath of my own local there.
Right.
Because, they were supporting the other group, but they lost. So I was on the winning side. Okay. They did not allow him to take office because of the strike, saying it would be too disruptive, which, you could understand.
Right.
But we thought that you couldn't withhold office. I mean, you could you may want to keep the same leadership there, but you need to turn the office over to the newly elected. So we finally got that accomplished. We had to go to the labor board, but they had said you have to allow the new person to take office. So he took office, and then he immediately made me the communications director, so that we could communicate, with the system at that time. And because he was the Lone Ranger in that office, he didn't have anybody else either. So, and I was his only helper there. So that's how I really got involved with the union politics, just over political issues contractual issues that became political issues that supported the new candidates. And then a changeover took over. I mean, he was the first one that took office, and then it changed. Every election thereafter, we got in all our new guys, and we really did a good job, because we were just full of vinegar and had no idea of what we just wanted to do whatever we could do, and just were fearless about it, just fierce about it. And we changed that contract from a little book to the pocket size that you had to have an extra size pocket to fit in. But we made some great changes in that contract. And everything from the qualifications committee to the sick leave, and, promotion provisions and bidding provisions and all that stuff, where, you shouldn't have to be asking to go somewhere. I mean, they should know that you can't make it in an overnight, to move your whole family. I mean, you should have provisions in there that allow you to work it out, not have to struggle with it. So we made, that was a contract for the record. It's still the best contract in the airline industry.
And
Well,
that's
the
a
airline no
contract
longer
as a
exists,
result
but-
of the strike.
No, it was
Or-
a contract following the strike as a result of the newly elected officers that took over
Got it.
during the strike and subsequently. And then 2 years later, I was asked to run for general chairman as a business rep. following my communication work, and I didn't even know what that was. You know, I didn't want to I wanted to do what I was doing. I enjoyed doing the communication work.
Now, as a communications director, how much, did you still work
Yeah, no, I worked full-time,
full-time?
yeah,
And so you did all that
on my own time,
on
yeah,
your own time?
after hours. We didn't do a lot of lost time. We didn't have any money then, you know, so you couldn't take people off the clock. So I did this, you know, I worked day shift then, I was on days, and I'd come in at night, do that.
And then, so then when you get to be elected, general chairman,
And that was in 1968. That was an election where we had another woman who was in office that I had to run against, and we defeated him. And we also defeated the secretary treasurer. And we put on, actually before that, we had put on 2 new general chairmen. My buddy Frank from California, and 2 Franks, one from Chicago and one from Boston, and they ran in '67. So we added 2 staff members, and then we had an election in '68. We defeated one that was there. I ran, and then we had the Space Center, so we had a Space Center representative. So we put on about 4 different staff members in those 2 or 3 years.
So
Expanded it.
you start full-time union work in
68.
'68. And
Yeah.
up until that, you work full-time on the job and do everything at night and weekends and on your own time.
Right.
Which is a lot of time.
A lot of time, yeah. Yeah. But it was worth it. Met a lot of people. Had a lot of help. You know, it was amazing because everybody was willing to work when they saw that what we were trying to do. They volunteered to help us, and we had the help, and we had the support. We couldn't have done the things we did without the members supporting us. They had to back
Absolutely.
us.
Yeah. And this was not a closed shop.
No, it was a union shop. Yeah, you had to join the union within a certain period of time. So it was a closed shop. Yeah. And one of the conditions of employment was you join the union within 6 months, or I think it was 6
Now, was
months.
there anything in the contract, you told me the story about not signing off on the landing gear,
Right.
and the foreman just signs it. Did the contract ever address that issue? Was that something that would be
Well, what we finally ended up doing.
negotiated, talked about?
Well, yeah, because we established full-time safety committees. And, which meant that they worked, for the airline, they got paid, but part of their job was to work on safety issues. So then they addressed those problems as a committee at each location, and and that was negotiated, where we did monthly joint reviews of all the issues that we'd have tours and so forth every month, once a month. Union and company personnel that were both required to look at safety matters and address safety matters, and they'd take a tour around and make sure they understood what the issue was and then correct it. So if you had a safety problem, you could call the committee, the grievance committee, and then the safety committee, and you would not be subjected to termination or threats, and that matter would have to be investigated, you know. So that's how we got around that. And it was really a good system because it helped, the company really wanted to do the right thing, but they also had to meet their schedules.
Right.
And sometimes people would, you know, just look the other way on some of the safety issues, and not on things that mattered really too much with, you know, with the safety of the traveling public, but, you know, it could, just like the landing gear thing.
Sure.
I'm sure that, they could bring it in with the gear up or the gear, not locked, but, why go through that?
Right.
And so we established procedures to follow, and everybody was instructed on the supervisors, the lead mechanics, and the members all knew what the procedures were, and you follow those procedures when you had an issue that dealt with safety. Or even the grievance procedure was a big problem we had hundreds of cases at arbitration, been there for years, and we had to bargain our way through them because you couldn't arbitrate them all, couldn't afford to arbitrate them all, even if you wanted to. And just like the issue on the sick leave, we'd already lost that in arbitration.
Right.
So we bargained our way through that.
So in those years in the 60s, were there very many black members? And were there any women? And then
No, not, in fact, the only black members we had were sweeping floors. And in 1964, when they passed the Civil Rights Act, we immediately, started discussions with the carrier to change that. Tell them that we shouldn't have to wait to be cited. We need to do what we should have been doing without a law. So you can't tell us that the only place a black person can serve this company is behind the brew. I mean, how can you say that? So they couldn't, so that was one of the things that we negotiated in the other agreement. As a follow-up was that you had promotional, and you had tests you could take, and you had things to study to prepare yourself for tests so you could advance. But you had to be hired first. So they had to make the decision to start hiring minority people and women. We had very few. We had some, but very few women. I shouldn't really say that because at that time the airlines provided their own food service. So we had our food kitchens, and there we had mostly women employed there.
And were the porters or the black people sweeping and the women they weren't in the machinist unit?
Yes, they were.
They were all in.
Right. They were called cleaners.
Okay.
Or janitors. If they cleaned the airplane, they were cleaners, fleet service helpers. If they were building cleaners, they were janitors. And if they were worked in the flight kitchens, they were represented by the union. And they were a big facility right close to the airport because they prepared the meals.
Right.
We got them ready and put them on trucks and they hauled them to the airport. So we had great food service.
And so, but after 1964, then some of the process for moving from those jobs into mechanics jobs.
Higher skilled jobs.
Higher skilled jobs.
Higher paid, higher skilled.
That promotional.
It did not really start until '68 because we didn't have the provisions negotiated until that '68 bargaining, which really didn't end. It took us 2 years to get that contract. We didn't sign it till January the 27th, 1970.
Oh my God.
We went through every board member, including the chairman of the board, trying to get this contract really where it needed to be. And we got it there. But it took a long time getting there. And I have to say that the management level at that time did the right thing. They wanted some of these changes had to be made because it was just, nothing was done for a long time in the way of work rules. And they worked with us, but it was a massive undertaking because it was so much to do. I mean, we had committees working on different things for months, safety committees, grievance committees, arbitration committees, work rule committees, promotion committees, qualification committee. I mean, we changed all those rules because that was a nonsense rule, going there with your hat in your hand to get promoted, or moving, bidding around, and then being threatened with termination if somebody didn't like you. They didn't have to raise them, they just didn't make it, son, you know. So it was a heck of an undertaking, but we did start moving on the process of promoting those minorities that were already there. And the company did look towards trying to hire minorities. They started the process. And, you know, we pushed them, but they didn't fight hard either. I mean, they knew they had to do things. The problem was it was hard to make some of the moves, but with some of the provisions that we negotiated, we were able to do a lot of on-the-job training, because a lot of the minorities didn't have the skills. You know, they didn't, some of them did, and were just not hired. Well, that got solved, but you know, if they had the skills, they got hired. But then we had a hiring freeze too at that time, so it kind of, you know, we had a boom in the 60s, and then it died, and then we had a layoff in the 70s and early 70s. So it was kind of a bumpy ride there. But we finally managed to bring on a lot more minority people. Not so many women in the mechanic end, but I don't think it was a fault of the carrier as much as you just didn't have anyone to come into the field to select from.
So you win this election and you start working full-time for the IAM.
Right. I became a general chairman, which I had no knowledge of what the work was to be, which was everything, you know. I mean, you were a representative, and we had a very our boss was he was a very skilled politician. He was very smart, but he was not very well liked, and we had trouble. People had trouble warming up to him, but he was really a smart guy. He knew what had to be done. He just had an abrasive way of trying to get things done. So, but he was smart enough to bring on people that he knew could do the work, or that he felt could do the work. And he was also well aware of his shortcomings.
Huh.
So he was that smart, you know. And so the people he brought on did a lot of cover for him, but they did the work that needed to be done with his help, because he knew what needed to be done, and he knew how to go about doing it. And but he wasn't the right guy to do it all, you know, for a lot of personal reasons. I mean, him personally. But none of us that came on really were that experienced. We had people that were committee people. They had experience, you know, a little bit with grievance procedures. But it's a different, you know, when you're at that level, you're handling, you know, arbitration. You're handling day-to-day problems. At a higher level, you're dealing with corporate vice presidents, and they usually have their lawyers doing their bidding for them. So we were handicapped to that extent that we didn't have all of that formal training, but they didn't have the membership behind them either. We did. So that was our biggest tool, you know, and our biggest threat. And we learned how to use it, and we learned how to turn it on and turn it off, how to control it. But it's no good if you can't control it. And the people, they trusted us, they believed in us, and, you know, we tried to demonstrate that we were doing the best that we could for them. And we never had a problem with our members, never lost an election. None of us. Even the boss. We had to carry him sometimes, but, you know, but because of us, you know, we were able to, and it was a great experience. We divided the country up, you know, in the regions, because TWA served almost every major city in the country here. And everybody assignment required that you go to the union meeting, every union meeting every month, every full-time rep. You go in the day before, you handle any problems with the management there, and you always had a steward or a committee person with you, never alone. No deals, straight, you know, straight grievance handling, no, you know, swapping of favors. And that night, you meet with your committee, you have a couple of beers with them, you talk to them, your stewards, your officers, find out what's going on, what their problems are. The next day, you meet with the management again, take them in there and deal with those problems. That night, you go to the union meeting, you give a report, you do what you need to do at the union meeting, and if there's any work left over, you stay there till you get it done, and then you move on to your next station. And that was how we dealt with it. And that was a big change from everywhere. We'd never done that.
That was a different way of having the Grand Lodge rep job?
No, this was not a Grand Lodge rep
No,
job.
this is
This is the district,
district.
which was a business rep job.
I see, okay.
But,
Right.
you know,
The chairman.
it was the way of that the outstations never had that kind of representation. The big cities like LA, Chicago, Kansas City,
That's
New
where people
York,
would be.
Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, that's where they concentrated.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, the Clevelands, the Detroits, the Amarillos, the Tulsas, the Oak Cities, you know, Las Vegas, Sacramento's, you know, all those little places, would never see anybody until
Until you came in and said every meeting.
and everybody had assignments so that they could make those meetings every month. Because a lot of them, every local had a meeting every month.
Right,
And some of them were on the same day. So you had to find a way, you know, either somebody else had to cover,
right.
or you had to do it, but you had to make those meetings.
So you were on the road once you started that, on the road,
Yeah, constantly.
or was that hard on your family?
Well, I think it was, you know, and it takes a special kind of, you know, family, spouse, and it takes a strong person to be able to live with that, and, you know, one that's not very insecure. I mean, you know, my wife was, I couldn't have done it if she never complained. Not to the point where, I tried to make everything, because at that time you could fly anytime.
Hmm.
And we had passes, so we could fly. I'd be in LA and my son would have a ball game, and I'd get on the airplane and fly there to see the ball game, get on the midnight flight, go back to LA, like the same night, you know. And, we were able to do that, and we
Yeah.
did that.
And
I
that
did
that helped me.
Well,
Make it
yeah,
work,
you know. But it's still not the same as being home every evening, you know, or when the toilet quits working, or when, you know, the grass needs cutting, and, you know, snow needs shoveling, and you're in Phoenix, and
And it's sunny.
yeah, and beautiful. But, yeah, we spent a lot of time, 2 or 3 days a week on the road, at least, you know.
And did you spread the newsletter model?
Yeah, you
As
know.
you started traveling around?
Well, you know, usually what would happen is if you left, then it ended. But, you know, I was able to find somebody else to take it over, and they, from there on, they continue to have a newspaper there. And wherever we went, you know, if the local had to be of a certain size, because you know, some of our locals were real small, like we had 40 or 50 people in Cleveland, same amount in Detroit. And
They
they
don't need a
belonged to, they
newsletter.
belonged to an amalgamated lodge.
Mhm.
So they didn't even have their own logo. They belonged to a logo, but it was, 4 or 5 airlines in it, because, United was big in Cleveland, and, Northwest was big in Detroit.
Mhm.
So they were the dominant, they had the dominant numbers. But we were always, active. We always had active members, and we insisted on it to be on the boards, And in those amalgamated locals, they tried to keep somebody from every carrier on their executive board. So you had, representation there from your locals, different airlines. But yeah, the big stations, all had newsletters. Most of them did. San Francisco, New York, and you had, several New York areas. You had LaGuardia, Newark, and Kennedy. They were different locals, so they had their own newspapers. And Boston had theirs. Yeah, so we had that pretty much.
Sounds good. You want to take a break for a couple minutes?
Yeah, let's.
And we're back. So I guess we're up to the point where you spent from 1968 to 1978 doing.
Doing the service contract work for TWA and Ozark. Those were the only 2 major carriers we had at that time. So.
And there was no strike during that stretch.
68, 78. Yeah, we had 2 short strikes. We had in 72, I think that's when Usry was the Secretary of Labor. I think that's the one we had. No, I think it was 74 with Usry. 75. Anyway, one of those, we had a short strike. We had less than a day. It was one of those short strikes. And then the next one was probably, I think, 75. We had another one where we were going to go on strike, and then Usry sent his limousines after us before we could leave town. So then he called us into his offices there at the Department of Labor and tried to get us to work our way through the issue, which was the emergency overtime issue again coming to haunt us. And I forgot what the other issue is. We had a couple of them that we just weren't going to resolve. Kerry didn't want to resolve it. We weren't going to resolve it. So. But we, as Usry is so good at doing, found a way to, get us to come to terms, at least to the kinds of terms where it didn't require, a strike to resolve it, and we worked through it afterwards, which was probably a good move. But we had, like I said, our people were very loyal and trustworthy, and they were gone. When we made that call at midnight, they were out. So, and then when we told them to come back, they came back. Some of them a little slower than others, but they came back.
They weren't quite ready to come back so fast.
Well, yeah, and and really, it's it's a testament to their trust in us, which was great to have. And the carrier knew it. They knew that they didn't have them behind us, and I can't. That's another thing I could never understand, how a supervisor or a district manager or superintendent can believe that they can lord it over a workforce. When, you got hundreds of people that, that you're making unhappy, and you think that just by cracking the whip, you're gonna be, successful in whatever you're trying to do. I mean, these people are ingenious. I mean, they've got all kinds of ways to deal with those kinds of problems that you'd never even know took place until it happened, in the workplace. I mean, there's all kinds of things that they would do. Yeah, they would have to go to the bathroom, more often than not. They would, line up to, and have to go other places. So now what happens to your work? What are you gonna do? Or find parts you don't have parts available because they're getting transferred around, moving around in different areas. They're not where they should be. So, eventually I think they learned that, they've got to maintain a certain amount of rapport with everybody, because you don't want them all angry at you. And, that gives us the horsepower we need.
Mm-hmm.
So, but some of them never learn, and
some of the management.
yeah, they never learn. Yeah, most of them, some of them learn the hard way. Some of them have come up from the ranks and they know what it's like. But
Now, were there very many people in management who started off in the shop?
yeah,
And
well,
did you
at
keep
the
relations with them?
no, not that way. You mean in terms of friendships and stuff?
Yeah,
No.
no.
Usually, those individuals didn't really seem to be some of them were activists, but there was a line there. You always had a line there that you had to maintain, and because they had a responsibility and had a job to do, and you can't, you can't mix, your friendship and your other things up with
Right.
some of the duties that you have. But we had a lot of good people that went up through the ranks. We had some that turned the other way. I mean, it's just the nature of things, Some people take success well, others take advantage of it in the wrong way,
Right.
in negative ways.
Huh.
But
Can I go back to the strike?
sure.
The long strike, just because I think I didn't really ask much about community support. If that was a piece of the story, because for 42 days there was enough time to perhaps need it.
I don't think, and I'm speaking strictly from Kansas City, I'm trying to recall, TWA was one of the three largest employers in the Kansas City area. So when you had a strike, they would eventually have to let all the people go. No one really expected it to go that long.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was why they really weren't prepared for what did transpire, because it was an attempt to try to bargain through 5 major airlines as opposed to one at a time, which each individually would have an economic effect, on the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
But not as big an effect as the 5 together.
Right, yeah.
And they were, I think, they were under the belief, it's my belief anyway, that, well, they're never gonna let 5 airlines go out, and if they do, they won't last long.
Right.
I think that was kind of the attitude. And everybody was fooled by it. So in terms of community support, I don't recall that we had any, you know, real outpouring of support from the community. I just think everybody was kind of waiting for it to get over, you know,
Yeah.
and thinking it'll be over, you know, it just won't be long. But you know, travel then, business travel then, was probably not as big a deal as it is today. I mean, it was big, you know, but not near what it is today. And even with 5 major airlines, there weren't probably this number of flights in the air, you know, at one time that there are today. You know,
Right.
not near.
Yeah.
But it did affect, you know, the delivery of mail. It did affect a lot of cargo shipments. So, but I don't recall anything, you know, unlike, you know, the Eastern Strike, which was much later, but it was more high profile.
Much more, yeah.
Yeah, and of course it had, you know, the players, you know, the Lorenzos and the Bates and those characters that, you know, what they were listed as the worst bosses ever or something like that, you know.
Gets people's attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And plus it was, they had the whole labor community
Involved, yeah.
involved
Absolutely.
throughout the country.
Yeah. So was your neighborhood where you lived, were there mostly, was there widespread support for labor? Or
It was
not even
mixed.
an issue?
It was mixed. One of my neighbors, 2 of my neighbors worked for TWA as mechanics. One of them was pro-union, one of them was not. And he would have lived right next door to me.
Mm.
You know, but then we had the other neighbor who worked for TWA, he was in the training department. One was a lawyer. They were, you know, the Moores were, you know, sympathetic. They weren't opposed to it, you know, they weren't anti. But it's like so much, you know, you go out the door, you're singing, you're swinging your lunch pail, but you know, then after the first week and the second week and the third week, and then you start to, you know, things get a little more intense. And you know, the pocketbook gets a little more strained too, quite a bit. But no, I don't recall anything other than there was a lot of publicity because it was such a major dispute, and well, it even you know, Seamiller took on the carrier's lawyer who was bargaining for them on television. That was a big thing, and he really did a beautiful job of you know, putting forth the union's case, and you know, saying that you know, we're a democratic organization and the members have spoken and they have, you know, declared a strike, and we need to find a resolution to it. And you know, we were really proud of Roy Seamiller over that. He did a good job, much to, I think, the public's surprise. I think he swayed a lot of the public. But Lyndon wasn't happy, so he had the pressure on. He had to get those airlines back in the air.
So then in 1978, what happens?
78, we had, deregulation, I think, was about to take effect, or did take effect. I know the 80s we suffered through deregulation. And the airlines started changing how they service different cities You know, they went to a hub spoke
Right.
system. TWA made a lot of changes with their maintenance facilities and some of their spokes and hubs, you know, were switched around. And you know, hindsight's always better than foresight, but they probably made some you know, serious errors in where they placed their support. You know, where they really wanted to go. They probably you know, they expanded into a lot of the international markets, and which they had a lot of markets to begin with, but they went even further, and they got caught up in some high costs of planes, and of course we had a lot of management changes. You know, Howard Hughes owned us for a good many years, and then you know, when Tillinghast came in and the courts forced Hughes to sell his interest, and then Chase Manhattan Bank with Charles Tillinghast took it over. So we had a lot of debt brought on by the changing over to a completely jet fleet back in the late '60s, and all those costs, and then the fuel costs started rising, and then we had some bad incidents with a terrorist group that took one of our planes hostage, and it takes a long time to recover and get the confidence of travelers back. You know, things like that happen. And we had Flight 800 went down to New York, but we had a lot of management, and Tillinghast was not. The airline people were gone. Even with Hughes, you know, he had Jack Fry and the flying people, you know, the people that actually flew airplanes, were there until probably the early '70s, and then Hughes brought in his people from the Hughes Tool Company. And Hughes was a pilot too. You know, he loved airplanes. But the people that were brought in made some bad decisions, and the debts mounted. Then the banks come in and they throw out all those people, and they take over, and then they form a TWA, Trans World Corporation, and they buy up Hilton and Canteen and Century 21 and I don't know, a bunch of different companies, spin off TWA. They bought it with TWA's money. They kicked TWA out without any capital and tell them now you're on your own. So it was hard to survive in a deregulated industry, and you had all those upstart airlines, and Lorenzo comes along and creates all that havoc with Texas Air, Texas Core, and Eastern and Continental, and even makes an attempt to buy TWA. And he used to work for TWA at one time.
Really?
He was in the
I didn't
finance
know that.
department, yeah. So we took the devil's disciple, which was Carl Icahn, forced him out of the play, paid him about $40 or $50 million, I think somewhere around $40 million, just to get out of the game. And it was all downhill from there with Carl Icahn.
Now you know all about all of this now. Did you know about it all at the time?
All of what? What do you mean?
The ins and outs of the fortunes of TWA. I mean, you're still servicing your members and
Oh, yeah,
dealing
we-
with day-to-day arbitration and, on-the-spot issues, but you also had a fairly good sense of the larger picture.
Yeah, because we had to deal with those individuals. You know, they all brought in their
Mm-hmm.
legal staffs and then they made changes in the structure and the reporting and the handling of the problems. They went from regional to national and back to regional.
Mm.
And then they moved their headquarters from, first it was in New York, then it was in Kansas City, and then it goes back to New York, and then it goes to Mount Crisco, where Icon is from, one of his buildings. So we had to deal with these people almost on a day-to-day
So it
basis.
affected you in
Yeah,
a
it
big
did.
way.
So-
It's not a question
So we
of
try
keeping
to know where they
touch.
came
Yeah.
from,
Yeah,
and you know
Huh.
what their background was, and you know whether we could deal with them or not. Find that out fairly quick. But so no, we follow the traffic pretty much. We want to know who was in the driver's seat and where they came from, you know,
Mhm.
and what their track record was. So we made it a point.
And
to,
you get appointed to an arbitration board? You become an
yeah,
arbitration board member at some point in here, right?
Yeah, I took over the right after the strike, along with being the communications director. I was appointed by the then new elected boss, which was called president, general chairman, to the arbitration board, because at that time, instead of having one board member, we had 5. We had one in LA, one in San Francisco, one in New York, one in Philadelphia, one in Chicago. And what was happening to us was the hearings were being held in those different areas, and the same issue decided, like for example, on an overtime issue, would be different in LA than it was in Chicago.
Mhm.
So when you had a problem in New York, they'd take their pick or create a new, you know,
Right.
argument.
Yeah.
So we were all over the map, you know, we had no real rule. I mean, it was just, so, like I said, Schwind was really a smart man. He said, we're gonna consolidate them all. We're gonna bring it in-house. We're gonna have one board member, one arbitration for the panel member for the union, and we're gonna know what's going on everywhere. So when we started bringing it all in-house, we had hundreds of cases that were pending arbitration for years. Hundreds of them, you know. And some of them had files, some of them didn't. So I had to go around and try to put it all together, and came back with boxes of grievances. So, you know, we sorted through them and decided we just can't arbitrate these things. You know, there's not enough money, there's not enough time. Let's categorize them, identify the issues, and we'll make it an issue at arbitration, bargaining, and we'll resolve that problem, change the contract. So it reflects the current,
Mhm.
understanding of the parties. That was a big undertaking but a lot of the grievances were multiples of the same thing, you know, violations of the same type of problem. So, but sorting through it was a time-consuming project, but it was one we did, and then we set them all aside and took them to bargaining and set up a special committee, you know, to review all these grievances.
Got it.
And then they had to go back, and we had to go back and make sure that everybody was gonna be, you know, agreeable, amenable to whatever. We understood the issues and how we were gonna change it. And that's what we did. A lot of them, we got no monetary settlement, but we got a contract change that solved that problem, eliminated that problem. Then we had the regular run-of-the-mill arbitrations, had a lot of terminations. Some jurisdictional issues, you know, job-related cases, and which you always have. So then we would schedule those, and we changed our panel too. We changed the way we handle arbitration in the contract with different procedures. So you had definite procedures to go through and steps, and the way to select arbitrators, the way to remove them. Because before you couldn't even remove them.
Mm.
You had a fixed panel.
Right.
Well, they had a guaranteed job, they weren't gonna give that up, so what do? You know, you get, I'll give you, you win now, you win next time, you know. At least that's the way it appeared to us, so by having the threat of, you know, all we want's a fair decision, that's all we want.
Right.
You know, we don't want any special treatment, but we want a fair, you know, decision. And for the most part, the arbitrators, we had a good panel, and some, you never agree with every decision, but I think it ended up doing a lot, working well for us, much better than it did in the past. So that was the arbitration, and then, and I eventually started to turn that over to another person, so that, you know, we could keep on top of it. And then we changed our system where instead of me handling all the cases, I would bring in the representative who had processed the case, and he would present it, and I would serve on the board as the union member of the board, and he would make the presentation and be responsible for, and I would help him, you know, develop the case and put it on, and, you know, we'd work together to prepare. But that way, the politics got taken out of the grievance procedure somewhat, because, you know, it's easy to file a grievance and process it on up.
Right.
But if you gotta handle it at the end of the day, you know,
need to be more
you're gonna have
careful.
to, that's right, because, you know,
About what
it's
you're
your
taking
ox is
there.
gonna get gored, you know, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, so.
Hmm.
Plus, it worked better for us too, because, you know, you had to, the grievance procedure works only if the parties are, have issues that they honestly can't agree on. They're real, you know, really real issues.
Mm-hmm.
But if they just, you know, just don't wanna agree on it, that's a different problem.
If they just wanna complain.
Yeah, or if they just want it their way.
Yeah.
So, we had some issues, some grievance arbitration comes to mind. We had to arbitrate the word all,
The word all,
ALL.
okay.
We were told that our contract said that all maintenance performed in and about company facilities owned, leased, or operated would be performed by mechanics, union mechanics. And they moved some of the work to a leased facility and hired outside people to do the work,
Non-union.
non-union. So, we filed a grievance, and their position was, all does not mean everything.
Okay then.
You know,
Seems like a fairly weak position from the get-go.
well, so they took us to task, we went to arbitration, and, all doesn't mean everything, but everything doesn't mean all either. So, the contract is pretty clear on what it said, that all meant all work performed in and about company owned, leased, or operated. They don't have to own, would be, you know. So we won that case. But we had to go to arbitration.
Right, right.
We had one other one that I just wanna mention, and make it real quick, because it's another funny one like that. We had, we negotiated language that, gave the mechanics on the flight lines, the airports and so forth, what we called a line premium pay, which was additional money because they had to work out in inclement weather and so forth. And it was our way of trying to elevate their wages a little bit above the others, because they were, you know, more responsible.
Working under more
Yeah.
difficult
Yeah, yeah.
conditions. Yeah.
But then we also had the poor baggage handlers that were out there loading bags in the same kind of weather,
yeah.
right?
Same place.
So we decided, well, let's just call it, you know, line premium pay. Don't link it to mechanics or anybody. Everybody gets a nickel an hour more for working the line. And, you know, because they're exposed to the elements. Well, TWA decided that, this was in the seventies now, so mid-seventies, so they were into the computers pretty heavy. So they decided they could compute and split that nickel by the amount of time you spent actually working on the airplane that was that flew in and landed. How much time you spent, taking bags in there to load them. The plane was on the ground for an hour, so you had 1 hour. They didn't want to pay the full 8 hours, so they just started whittling away at that.
Oh, and they figured they could take away the nickel hour per hour when you were inside for a little bit.
When you weren't physically
Right.
doing the airplane, right? Okay. So along with that, they made the argument that you have a 10-minute lunch, a 10-minute break twice a day, and you have a 30-minute lunch period and a 5-minute wash-up at the end of the day. But we can interrupt those at any time because they would take your 30-minute lunch period and say, okay, you're going to take 10 minutes now, go out there and work that airplane, and we're going to take 20 minutes later to go eat your lunch. So they would interrupt your lunch. Or they'd waive your break period, say you got to do this, forget the break period, and we'll give it to you later. So they give you 5 here and 5 there. So we said, no, wait a minute. That's not the intent of the language. Well, the language doesn't say that it's 5 consecutive minutes or 30 consecutive minutes, so we can break it up. So we named that the Woodling Amendment, because that was he was the Industrial Relations Vice President. We took that to bargaining, and everywhere in that contract, it's the only contract in the industry now, well, it doesn't exist anymore, but where there was time, it was consecutive. 5 consecutive minutes, 10 consecutive minutes, 30 consecutive minutes for lunch, 8 consecutive minutes for the hours of the day, They like to die. They did not want that to go in the contract, Well, you guys created a problem.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna have that issue anymore. It's consecutive. That's what it was, that's the way it's always been interpreted. And we're not gonna arbitrate it, we're gonna make you eat it. And it's gonna go in the contract, so that's what we did, so.
Well, that's funny. So, organizing drives were not something you had a lot to do with because your territory is airline shops where they're union shops.
Pretty much, but
Is that right?
at that time, most of the airlines were under some kind of a union shop. But there were startups. So then it started to become organizing targets. And a lot of our work got in, when we had organizing, it was as a result of mergers or bankruptcies that forced changes as we were bought up, consolidations, where like Northwest took Central Airlines became Republic because it merged a couple airlines, and Northwest bought Republic. So you had all those. Well, once you put those two together, you had different unions representing them. So we would have organizing drives to represent the
So
whole
who would be the
whole
new
unit.
representative?
But it usually end up being one union takes all. You're not gonna have, half of your workforce doing the same work represented by 2 different unions. So we would have those kinds of organizing activities that were, as a result of the mergers or acquisitions. But then we had the new startups that would come along, like Air Wisconsin and Big Sky, and so we would bring them, try to organize them, and we had organizing drives to do that. But they weren't as big as they are now. There's not as many of them, at that time
Right.
in the airlines. They were going on, but you know, you didn't have like the JetBlues and the,
Southwest.
Southwest we represented always.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, well, I shouldn't say always, because the Teamsters had them, and then Teamsters had the mechanics, and then we had the ramp and passenger service, and still do. And let's see, that's what makes, you know, the talk about the unions are, you know, make it, you know, too costly to survive in this environment. Southwest has been an organized airline for as long as I can remember. You know, some of the groups are no longer. I think their mechanics now are not organized by anybody, but most of their pilots belong to unions, their flight attendants belong to unions, their passenger service and reservations, which are huge, belong to the machinist union,
Mm-hmm.
and they're the only profitable airline out there, and have been for, I don't know, what, 40 quarters they brag about now. You know, even in this climate.
Yeah. It's
So,
worth noting.
yes, it is. Yeah.
So you become a Grand Lodge rep?
I did. Wimpensinger was asked me to join the international staff in 1978, which I had no, you know, I was shocked, you know. I mean, I was, you know, working and doing my job there and enjoying it. But it was an opportunity that I had never considered, never thought about, but, you know, one that you couldn't hardly say no to.
And did that mean moving at that point?
Well, it did. Peter Paul was the vice president of transportation, working under, Wimpy was the international president at that time, I think.
I think he comes in 77, so he
77,
would have
okay.
been fairly
Yeah,
new,
I was
but
pretty
he
sure
would
it
have
was
been
him,
there, yeah.
So, and he was the transportation vice president before Peter Paul, so he handled the airlines too, so he was familiar with all the airlines. But, so, John, I had to report to John Peter Paul, and he wanted me to go to Denver, move to Denver, which is not very far from Kansas City. And so I talked to him, I said, you know, John, I'll go anywhere you want, but I hate to move to Denver or anywhere, and then next week you say you want me working in Miami or LA, because that's the nature of our business, you know. And he said, well, I need you in either Denver or Seattle is where I need you. I said, well, you know, we travel anywhere, we have free transportation, so, you know, I would rather not move, but if you think that I need to, I'll do that. But why don't we just try it and see if you have a problem with it, then I'll move, you know. All right, he said, yeah, because he was an airline guy too. He said, okay, that's fair enough. So the first assignment I got was Alaska. And I thought, oh my God, did he not agree with me? And now I'm going to Alaska. So I get assigned to Alaska to, we had a lot of internal problems with the organization. We had, you know, the transportation and the regular territory people that were working, and we had a lot of airline business up there at that time. We had Northwest was flying everywhere, and Alaskan Airlines, and we had all kinds of little stations. So anyway, I went up there, and it was a legitimate assignment, and I loved it up there. It was wonderful. So I would stay there 2 or 3 weeks at a time and visit all the stations and try to get a handle on things, and then come back home and, you know, and then get another assignment. So I got to where I could just travel back and forth there like once a month, spend a few days, and do other assignments. And of course then, you know, the bottom fell out of the airlines pretty quick then. We had you know, we had the issues with went down. They expanded to the point where they just couldn't meet their bills. You know, they just went too fast, too big, bought too many airplanes. Eastern did the same thing. So they all got strapped for cash, you know, during the 70s. And that's when Lorenzo came along, you know, and created the havoc in the industry. So I got, after I had an assignment to put together Southern and Northwest, or Republic, I guess it was, out of Atlanta, Southern Airlines. So Republic Airlines bought Southern, and we did that merger. And then we did the Hughes Air West, and I think that was Republic also out of Phoenix. That was before Northwest bought Republic. So I got assigned to Phoenix. That took about another year. And then that's when things started happening with, I think it was 79 or 80, maybe it was in the early 80s that Braniff filed bankruptcy. And they asked me to go to Dallas to work out of that office because we represented the Braniff people there at that overhaul facility at Dalfort. And of course that district there also represented Continental and the foreign flag carriers. We had Mexicana and Aeromexico and Southwest. So we had problems internally. We had to suspend the district, and the old timer that was there was Faircloth, LT Faircloth, and he was not in good health, so he asked me to stay and work with him because I was the airline guy, he wasn't. And I did, and we worked through Braniff's first emerging out of first bankruptcy, and then that didn't last too long, and we had all kinds of problems with the facility there. Then the Pritzker family out of Chicago bought the interest in Braniff, and then they tried to reorganize it and crank it up again, and we had a lot of bargaining going on with them to try to, work out the details of what they wanted to do. So we worked on that, and during that time, Continental goes on strike. So my 6-week assignment to Texas ended up being about 6 years before I left there, commuting back and forth from Kansas City every week. And then of course the Eastern strike in Texas area, all of that went down, and I was working between Dallas and Houston on those carriers. And I was pretty lucky because the CWA had an active group in Houston, and they were really helpful. They had an office there, and I could work out of their office, and they would always, provide help. They were really very good, and we had good field people there also. Because that strike just went on and on and on, and we had a lot of demonstrations.
The Eastern Strike.
Yeah, the Eastern Strike. Yeah. And the Continental, it was almost simultaneous, but he took Continental.
Yeah.
Just took it over. And then he started piecemealing it, so you couldn't tell the difference between the two, and then, we just never could settle that Eastern Strike. So
were you still involved in communications? I mean, were you involved in getting public support?
Oh yeah, we tried as much as we could to get as much, publicity as we could of the dispute and what it all meant. And all of it helped, because we had to go to the federal bankruptcy court there in Houston. And it was a joke, Flowers, who was the judge, the federal judge. you know, we, we staged a, we rented a big flatbed trailer, and in the middle of the night, parked in front of the federal courthouse there where the meters were. And had money to put money in the meters because we blocked about 4 or 5 meters. And we staged a mock bankruptcy court proceeding.
Out on the street?
On the street, right in front of the courthouse. And before the courthouse opened, we were already there. We had a big trash barrel, had a bunch of contracts, got my biggest guy, put him in a black robe. He was the judge. Put a table up there on that platform. And he was sitting there, and we had everybody lined up, all crying and sniffling, and had their contract in their hand, and don't know what's gonna happen to them, and, you know. And the judge had listened to their complaints, take their contract, throw it in the trash.
Clear traumatization.
They called right away, and I got a call from our legal counsel. What are you doing in Houston? So we're only having a little demonstration on, you know, the function of this court. Get that damn trailer out. So we finished up as quickly as we could, and we got our trailer out of there, but we made our point. So we had a lot of things like that, you know. We had air balloons. The pilots were, you know, from Texas Air were, from Continental, and some of them joined from Texas Air. Had a big, they were very active, so they would do a hot air balloon demonstration, or they'd do fly-arounds with private planes, and then they would bring coffins and put Eastern Airlines and, you know, and march through the Esplanade area there on the East Tex Freeway. And, you know, every opportunity we had, we tried to show the public to what was happening, you know. And it was news, and sometimes we'd get some pretty good coverage, but Texas was pretty much, you know.
Not a union-friendly state.
Yeah. No, we even went to Lorenzo's house and marched around it a few times, and you know, so they finally prevented us from doing it. But you know, you can get it done once, you get a little publicity, you drive on, try to find something else to do. But it was a difficult time.
What did you think about the way it ended?
Not a good ending. But, you know, there's a lot of blame to go around. I don't know, you know, I wasn't directly involved with in the bargaining on Eastern, but, yeah, it looked like we had opportunities to resolve that strike, and we got so close, we just couldn't quite, you know, get over that edge. And I think we had a lot of personality problems, you know. Borman, who was the CEO at that time, you know, was the former astronaut, Frank Borman. He was a pretty decent man, I thought, and you know, and I still think so. But it was hard times for him too. You know, I mean, his company was, you know, bleeding to death financially, and we were hurting in other ways that he couldn't, you know, help as much as maybe he may have wanted to. Couldn't, you know. You know, as we look back now, we can see some of those things. But at the time, when you're there and you're so close to it, you don't have that view, you know, that viewpoint. But no, it didn't end well. But I think deregulation, when you look at what deregulation has done, every airline, including now even American, who was the only one that escaped it, has filed for bankruptcy. And most of them are gone. If they're not, they've been absorbed or, consolidated with,
Yeah.
they've lost, they're no longer in existence as they once were. So deregulation was supposed to improve, and expedite the handling of some of the root structures and fair things, which the CAB did a terrible job of. I mean, they procrastinated for years on some of those issues. You couldn't live with that. So the idea was that you'd allow the free market to play and let the free market, take charge of everything. Well, this is what you got, and we do have cheaper airfares, but we don't have anything to go with, no frills, absolutely none,
That's for sure.
But, the airlines were going broke the other way, so they had to make a change, but they went from one extreme to the other. So we're faced with that situation today. It's
Paying
really,
the consequences.
yeah. So, as a result, I think Wimpy's prediction is coming about. He predicted many years ago that we're going to have 3 major airlines with this deregulation. That's where it's going to. And we're almost there. And if American buys up U.S. Air, that's where we're at. It's all over with.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
And you know what that's going to do to our travel. Yeah, we're going to be at the mercy of them, price-wise and otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you stayed in Kansas City and went out to do your job as Grand Lodge rep, and eventually you said you became internal affairs?
International affairs.
I just can't read my writing,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, international affairs.
That makes so much more sense. Okay,
Yeah,
how did you get to that?
well, the fellow that was there had been there for many years, and he was close to retirement. He I think had announced that he was going to be retiring, so they needed to replace him. And President Corpus asked me if I would be interested in, doing that kind of work. And I didn't really know what it was. I said, well, let me talk to Ben. And I think, yeah, I said, see, I was at that time, I had become a Grand Lodge rep in '78, so I was already on the international staff.
Even though you stayed based in Kansas City?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was, I think, 1990. And Ben had worked in the Peace Corps, and he'd traveled all over the world and lived with everybody the way they lived. So he was one of those, very adaptable individuals that loved the work he did, and he impressed me very much, and I decided I think I'd like to do that kind of work. So I accepted, and what the International Affairs Department was doing at that time was working with the Metal Workers Federation out of Geneva, which we were affiliated with from the very beginning.
Right,
We were
right.
an initial affiliate of them. And they would try to conduct training or meetings with in these countries where unions were actually outlawed, illegal, and try to help them develop a union program or a training program, and assist them in trying to get the government to recognize them, so that they could have bargaining rights. So Ben had traveled all over the world, in very remote areas. And our first trip was to Nairobi, Kenya. And it just happened to be we were in London getting ready to go to catch a flight to Nairobi, and we had visited his sisters. His sisters lived in England, and we were going to the airport to catch our flight, and I'm looking, seeing tanks at the airport, and big convoys of trucks, military trucks, and I'm saying, Ben, what's going on here? I don't know. So the English, who knows what they're probably on maneuvers or something. Ben was just, he just, so, man, I don't know. This don't look good to me. Why would they be at this airport? Tanks? Not a big deal. So we get in, catch our airplane, we're flying. Pilot comes on, he says, if you look out the right window, you'll see these tracers. They're not shooting stars, the Gulf War has started. So, there we go.
While you're in the air.
Yeah. So, Desert Storm had begun. So that was, we get to Nairobi, and one of the ways that governments prevented the activists from forming unions is they would also prevent them from traveling. And so we would try to have meetings in places where we could bring people in from different countries where we couldn't hold meetings in their country because, they were fearful of their lives and so forth. But then they would engage these other governments and, I guess, use some form of coercion. These poor people would come there to come to our meeting, and they customs wouldn't let them put them back on the airport, get them back on the airplane, send them back home. So that's what was happening to us with some of the countries like Zimbabwe and Nigeria and others around there that were supposed to come to this first meeting for us. And then we had the Gulf War going on. So we had a lax period there, and so Ben's buddy, that was the regional guy for the IMF there, his name was Ben also, Ben Udagwu, decided to loan us his Mercedes and his driver to go take a ride in the bush, to show Alex around, show him the bush country and everything. So we went out for the day, and little did we know, so we took nothing with us, but the driver lived near this camp, this big tourist camp that the Europeans used, and he was wanting to get there to go home for the day, and we thought we were going to go out and come back. So he's driving, and there's no roads. Once you leave, 2 minutes out of Nairobi, it's dirt and rocks, So he's hurrying along, driving as fast as he can, going up and down these gullies. And I said, you're gonna tear something up. This is not a truck. Oh no, it's okay. Boom! He hits a rock, and I'm looking back, and you can see the oil behind us. So he has to shut her off, and then we're waiting for help. There's no roads. Everybody makes their own road. And eventually somebody stops in a big truck to pick us up, and they drag us to this camp. And the mechanic is not there to weld the hole in the pan, so we have to stay overnight in this very exclusive, camp in the bush. And we had tents that had showers and, facilities and everything. I mean, they were really, really nice facilities. Wonderful, fancy dinner. They're all dressed in their, best clothing. We're filthy. So we enjoyed the stay there and had to chase the elephants off, and the baboons kept dropping nuts on the tent all night long. Ben snoring, and I couldn't sleep. But we finally got our car fixed later the next day, and we took a tour of the area, saw all the wild animals, and it was about $300 a night to stay there. You know, but we had no choice, and then we got back, and then it was a problem trying to get home because you know, the American Airlines, I mean, all the U.S. airlines were being, you know, sort of boycotted, and there was worry that terrorists might be.
Right, yeah.
So we had to find, my wife, you know, was panicked, you know, well, you know, she was worried because she couldn't get a hold of me, and that was another story, but anyway, between her and George, they made arrangements for me to fly on Swiss Air and get back home, you know, and you know, I made
Quite
it
an
home.
introduction to your
That
new job.
was the introduction, right, and it was quite an introduction.
Now, did you have to move
No.
from Kansas City? Because, once again, you were gonna be traveling, or
Yeah, I was gonna be
travel
traveling.
from anywhere.
But the object was to, you know, think about moving, you know, and I did. I got an apartment in Washington D.C. on K Street, not far from the building. So I was, you know, between both places, but mostly I was gone. You know, those trips were
Long.
2 or 3 weeks, you
Yeah.
know, at a time, usually. And so we did quite a bit of traveling, and I didn't stay there that long, because then I was asked again to make a move. But I traveled to some wonderful places. Went to Japan, went to Brno, Czechoslovakia, to Swaziland, to South Africa.
And these were mostly for meetings with the international
With the metal workers.
metal workers.
Yeah, and trade unions that were affiliated. See, the IMF has there's over 25 million members in the Metal Workers Federation, and there's at least 100 or more unions. And then, 200 or more unions in about 100 different countries that they're in. So they would have regional meetings, and then they would bring in different people to do training or educating or just,
Mhm.
you know, and just meet with them. Mainly, these people were very educated. You know, they weren't. They knew what it was and what they needed to do, but they either didn't have money or facilities or equipment like computers or printers, typewriters, whatever that you could give them. So we provided them with a lot of material things, but as far as educating them, mostly we shared our experiences with them, and you know, listened to them to see if there was any way that what they were experiencing, if we could offer them any help or advice, you know. And much like what we're doing here when we get together, you know, it's they talk about their stories and how they tried to solve it and what their success or failures were. So, but I never knew people that were more devoted or committed to the work that they were trying to do. And a lot of, you know, did it at high risk,
Mm-hmm.
you know, personal risk to themselves, you know. Most of them did, because even in South Africa at that time, apartheid was still going on, and you know, if you had 2 or more people meeting on a corner, you couldn't assemble. That was an assembly, and that we had, when we had our meetings there, we had to meet secretly, or at least we thought secretly. I don't know how secret you could meet there with what was going on.
Probably people were secretly watching you.
Oh yeah, and you never knew that.
Yeah.
And you never knew who to trust. So it was pretty touchy, and it was sad to see those townships and the way the people were being treated. You know, people of all color. If you had any color at all that wasn't white, why, you had no rights in South Africa. You know, it was a terrible thing.
And did you come home and share? Did most of the members know what you were doing? I mean, what about that piece of it?
Well,
About
you
bringing
know,
it back to the sort of local membership?
as far as the international affairs end of it, I don't think a lot of our members understood or were exposed or knew about what was going on there. And that's probably a lot our fault, because we didn't do a lot of communicating on that aspect of it. But it was sort of a side thing that we're doing, had been doing for years, and had really no direct, effect or reflection on our members.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it did, because it was very fundamental unionism, And I mean, look what's happened now, around the world. I mean, all our work's gone.
And the thing we need more than anything else on the planet is an international
That's right,
group
yeah.
that
Yeah,
has some
right.
cohesive-
Because you raise those boats, and guess where the water's coming? It's coming back this way, And so, no, and I don't think that they still get exposed as much to it. I think more so now than before, but still not as much as they probably should know about the importance of that.
Mhm.
In fact, one quick story. Brian Fredericks was my equivalent, I guess, or I was his equivalent. But we worked together anyway on after Ben Sharman retired. And he was from South Africa. He was a man of color. He was Chinese, African, and Indian. So wherever we went in South Africa, at that time, of course, he had to be careful where he went, but he grew up there. He was my age, a little younger, 4 or 5 years younger, and had never voted. But we weren't allowed to vote. People of color weren't allowed to vote. So when apartheid did end, we sent representatives there from the union
Mhm.
to assist at the polls, as poll watchers to make sure that the elections were held. And I think Brian was in his early 50s when he cast his first vote. And he had to wait in line, I think, 3 or 4 hours to vote. So I had brought him back to Kansas City one time to visit, and took him to the overhaul base, TWA. And I don't remember if it was before or after this apartheid, but to show you how much ignorance exists, I was introducing him around, the people that I knew from, working in the hangar and everything. And one of the big shop stewards there wanted to know where he's from, and he told him. And, oh, South Africa, yeah. He says, well, you guys got unions there? Yeah, we got unions. We don't have all the privileges that your unions do, but, well, he says, and then I guess Brian was telling him that, we're not allowed to vote. Oh, I said, you guys just, you just work a little harder, and eventually you'll get the right to vote. It's just a matter of time. Says, you just got to work a little harder at it. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, I
He
felt
knows
I
nothing.
was so embarrassed, But Brian took it well. I mean, he was a very gracious person. And I told him after I apologized to him, he says, no. He says, not to apologize. He says, people just don't understand. They just don't know. He says, that's, and, but, I find this in a lot of places, not just here. So that just, shows you how little they do know about what's going on
And the place
around,
outside of their own.
even out of their yards,
Yep. Hmm.
So that was, I truly loved that job. So when George asked me to become his executive assistant, I had a hard time making that decision because I didn't want to leave that job. And then,
Did you tell him that?
oh yeah, I did. I said, I don't know, George. You know. Oh, he says, no, he says, I really need you to come over. And I said, well, what are we going to do with that job? Well, he said, you can still stay involved, you know, but he says, I need you over on this side. So, but he says, it's up to you, you know. That was the toughest decision I ever made,
Huh.
was giving it up, or leaving it, you know, because it was, you see those people out there and you can see the rewards. I mean, you can see what the work that you do really, you know, goes to work for you. I mean, you can see it happen. But anyway, I finally made the decision and went across, and I wasn't sorry afterwards, but it was
Move
just,
to DC?
yeah. Then I was already living there, so it was, finally I just decided to make it permanent. And you know, took the assignment, and we moved to DC, to Maryland, Dunkirk down here, not too far from here. And I stayed there for from probably 92 to 96. I think that's when I left, about 4 years. And then we had a tragic accident. One of our vice presidents was killed in an airplane crash in Quincy, Illinois. A fellow that served in the Midwest Territory. And then the council had to meet to make a replacement, and they appointed me to that position. So that was in December of '96. And I became a vice president for the executive council. So then I moved again, you know, to Chicago, where the regional office was. And another very interesting assignment, much different than the airlines, because it was mostly manufacturing. Well, it was all manufacturing. Some big companies, but a lot of small, you know, mom and pop shops, automotive stuff, John Deere, Caterpillar, Briggs and Stratton,
You went from
Mercury Marine.
disaster and decline in one industry to decline in the next industry, right?
Well, I was going to tell you, when I went into the territory there, we had 120, a little over 120,000 members just in the Midwest Territory. We had 9 states that was under the jurisdiction of that vice president. And when I retired in '03, we were down below 80,000. And every month I'd look at those records, and I'd ask you know, people from the staff that we had, you know, pretty good sized staff. Where are these members going? What shops are they? I mean, all I see is the numbers just disappearing, but you don't even hear about them unless they're big, you know,
Right,
like
right.
Maytag, and but it was just like hundreds every month. And now I think they're even down to half that in that territory. It's devastating. And all of it's the manufacturing base. It's,
Right, moving
yeah,
overseas.
yeah.
South? Some of it moves south before it moves overseas, or not so
No,
much?
a lot of this,
from those
well, I should
kinds
say
of
that. Some of it
manufacturers?
just flat closed. Like we had Revere Ware, you know, that was one of our big companies. We had over 1,000, 1,200 people there. It just shut down. You know, just shut down. And I'm not aware of whether somebody bought them or
Right.
you know, but I think they just finally couldn't compete with all the silverware and items coming from
Import.
all over,
Yeah.
all the imports. So, we had a lot of different disputes, you know, and with the employers. But mostly it was, you know, manufacturing. It was just that they couldn't compete. And just about everywhere we were involved in concessionary bargaining, which, you know, is the beginning of the end. I mean, it's just a matter of when you do your last concession. And it always ends up that way. You know, they'll survive for a while. And if they're serious about surviving, you know, they may, but most of them were not serious about it. They just knew the end was coming and they just wanted to extract as much as they could out of it and close their doors, either move offshore or just plain close their doors. So you devastated, you know, entire communities. Not to mention the lives of the personal people that were harmed by it all. You know, it's sad out there, and now, of course, now it's a different story altogether. I mean, you've got so many people unemployed and nowhere to go because all of them left a long time ago, and they're still leaving. But I think there's hope.
Yes?
Yeah, I really do. Because, you know, like they say, what goes around comes around. Now, you know, the costs of shipping are rising to the point where it's not cost effective for them to continue to go offshore, ship it back, make money on it. You're seeing some of it come back this way. Not only because of
The
driven by
economics,
cost, the economics.
yeah. Not because anybody has actually noticed that it helps to buy American.
Yeah.
Or do you think that's gonna change too? If enough jobs get lost, it'll dawn on people.
I think so. I think it's changing now. I think what's going on in Wisconsin and Ohio and the kind of publicity that's getting. Of course, everybody doesn't watch MSNBC like I do, and you know.
Some of them watch Fox.
I know, I know. But you know, God bless guys like Ed Schultz, because he's out there with them. I mean, he was in Wisconsin, he was in Ohio, he's out there with the Occupy Wall Street people, and Maddow, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
She's another wonderful. But you know, Chris Matthews and all of them, and Chris Hayes, there's just not enough of them on enough channels. And the newspaper is gone, you know, the newspaper, the reading print press is gone. But I really think I think we're going to survive it all. It's going to come back on a different form.
Yeah. What about the labor movement?
I think I believe the labor movement will have a resurgence, driven by all of the economics and what's taken place. And I think people are more aware now that these are the kinds of issues that, you know, what the unions were able to negotiate, others were able to enjoy, you know, because it was, you know, shared. I mean, it was spread out.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
they may not have had to pay for it, you know, or sacrifice for it anyway, but
That's who they owe it to.
that's who they owe it to.
Yeah.
And I think they're starting to realize it more. And some of even our members that are union people are recognizing giving credit where credit's deserved and not necessarily thinking that their employer gave it to them. Because that's who's taking it away from them now, real quick.
Yep.
But the one thing that I think they need to realize, and hopefully we can drive it home, is that it doesn't matter how good you can bargain and how good your contract is, because take it all away with a stroke of a pen through legislation. And that's what's happening out there in Wisconsin and Ohio and Michigan and all over the country
And that's
here.
why the political,
And it makes you wonder, how can you have legitimate contracts and then have government, whether it's state, federal, or local, take it away from you? You know, there's something wrong with the system there that needs to be fixed. And, you know, we need to get active politically and fix it. I want to just say one last thing,
okay.
unification.
Were you involved
Yes.
at the moment when the steel workers and the auto workers and the machinists were trying?
Yes,
Did you think it was gonna happen?
I did,
You really did.
yeah. Maybe I was more hopeful and more optimistic than I should have been. But I thought the time was a good time. Now would have been a better time, but, you know, we had good leadership from all three unions. You know, the presidents were serious about, you know, looking at it, and they all understood the importance of the strength and you know, what the effects of such a unification would bring about for the labor movement. It would have been a great thing. There were many obstacles, you know, political, internal,
Structural,
structural,
yeah.
policy, and leadership. But they were all, you know, we had worked through them pretty good. And I don't know, it was a big cultural shock, a big, you know, jolt culturally for all three unions, you
Yeah.
know, and their members. Because
Is that what you think was the final?
well, I think it was a
Cause.
combination, but I'm not sure whether it was. I know that our system, you know, we elect by referendum, the UAW elected by convention delegates,
Mm-hmm.
steel workers, you know, had referendums, but the due structures were a little different. The servicing was different too. So, you know, there was a difference, but it wasn't, I didn't think it was unmanageable because we all had a lot of compatible industries that we worked in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we had automotive stuff, you know, we had members in all those
Right.
heavy industrial states. And we had looked at that. Structurally, it looked like we could make it work. I mean, we
Mhm.
had to work at it. We couldn't do it overnight. We knew that. It wasn't going to happen in that time frame that we were shooting for. But we thought we could get the format of it out and work it in over time. And it would have been, you know, a great thing for the labor movement, for us, for all three unions.
So you think
So-
that's the answer this time around? This time around it might happen? You said
No.
you said you wanted to say one more thing, unification. You were talking about that
Yeah,
effort,
I was
not
talking
today.
about that
I
effort,
see,
yeah.
okay.
And that's probably one of my biggest disappointments. Because I think it would have given us so much momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm not sure, you know, what brought it down. Well, you had three presidents that were all close to retirement. And that had a lot to do with it. I think, I'm not sure how, I know that Jokic from the auto workers, who, you know, I love the man. He was a hard nut, but he, you know, he believed in his union, and he was hard to, to move off of his issues, but once you moved him, he made sense to him, he was there with you. And Becker was another, wonderful leader. Understood, they all understood what this really meant, because they were all been in it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know whether they felt that the leadership, how that leadership would work out. Who would lead the union?
Yep, that's always it.
And so it may have, and it was hard on our members too. I mean, they didn't want to be, they didn't want to have a steel worker or auto worker leading them, and vice versa. They didn't want the other. So, how do you have three presidents, or how do you wear three hats, or how do you have three hats running one organization? There was a lot of discussion on that, and there were concepts that could have worked. But it would have taken really a lot of cooperation. And really everybody pulling together on
A
it.
lot of commitment.
So, I just wanted to mention that as, one of the big things that we could have done a lot with that, where there was so much organizing, and we did a lot. We did do a lot of coordinated work with politics, and we worked on organizing campaigns jointly.
Right.
So you wouldn't have those kinds of conflicts, and you'd have the financial wherewithal and the staffing to do those things.
So did I forget to ask you anything?
I don't think so. Do you think so? And I'd like to make one last statement. This union has been my life. It's made my life wonderful. It's made me, I think, a better person, and it's helped me to understand people and listen more than to find out how to deal with them. I think the Machinists is a great organization. We do a lot of good, and without this union, I think this labor movement would really suffer a lot, because we do a lot of good, and we have a great organization and a lot of skilled people and a lot of committed people. We make friends that last a long time.
We've seen that here this
Yeah.
week, actually.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I thank you very much for your time.
And I